Your body is running thousands of chemical conversations right now. Messages are traveling through your bloodstream, telling organs when to speed up, when to rest, when to grow, and when to repair. These messengers don't shout. They whisper in a language written long before words existed, a code that keeps you alive without you ever noticing. Tonight, we're going to follow those whispers through every system they touch, watching how hormones coordinate the symphony of being human. Hormones are not magic, though their effects can feel that way. They're molecules, simple enough to fit on a molecular diagram, yet powerful enough to reshape your mood, your energy, and your entire sense of self. What makes them extraordinary isn't complexity, it's precision. A hormone released in your brain can travel the length of your body and unlock a specific cell, like a key finding the one lock it was designed for, ignoring millions of others along the way. The endocrine system operates on timing most people never consciously experience. While you sleep, while you eat, while you read these words, glands are measuring, responding, adjusting. Your pancreas tracks glucose moment by moment. Your adrenal glands prepare you for stress you haven't encountered yet. Your thyroid sets the speed at which every cell burns fuel. None of this requires your attention, which is exactly why it works. Let's start where many hormone stories begin, though not where they actually start. Your pituitary gland sits behind your eyes, nestled in a small bone pocket at the base of your skull. It's smaller than a pea, yet it controls more territory than any other gland in your body. People call it the master gland, and for once, the dramatic name fits. The pituitary doesn't just release hormones, it commands other glands to release theirs, creating cascades that ripple through your entire system. But even the master has a master. Just above the pituitary sits the hypothalamus, a region of your brain that serves as the translator between your nervous system and your endocrine system. When your brain detects cold, stress, or hunger, the hypothalamus converts those neural signals into chemical instructions. It releases hormones that travel the tiny distance to the pituitary, which then amplifies the message by triggering distant glands. This is how a thought can become a physical change. How stress in your mind becomes cortisol in your blood. The hypothalamus operates through something called the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which sounds technical, but describes something beautifully simple. It's a feedback loop. The hypothalamus sends a releasing hormone. The pituitary responds with its own hormone. That hormone reaches a target gland, which releases yet another hormone. That final hormone does its job in the body, then circles back to tell the hypothalamus and pituitary to slow down. It's a conversation with built-in volume control. Take your thyroid hanging in your neck like a butterfly-shaped thermostat. When the hypothalamus senses your metabolism needs adjustment, it releases thyrotropin-releasing hormone. This crosses into the pituitary, which responds by releasing thyroid-stimulating hormone into your bloodstream. TSH travels to your thyroid and instructs it to release thyroid hormones, primarily T3 and T4. These hormones fan out through your body, speeding up cellular processes, increasing heat production, sharpening mental focus. Then those same thyroid hormones loop back to the hypothalamus and pituitary saying, enough. The cycle slows. Balance returns. This negative feedback is what keeps your hormone levels from spiraling. Without it, a small signal could amplify into chaos. Imagine a thermostat that only knew how to turn heat on, never off. Your house would become an oven. Your body would do the same without these regulatory loops. The elegance isn't in the complexity, it's in the constant self-correction. But feedback loops can break. When your thyroid produces too little hormone, the pituitary keeps sending TSH, trying to coax more output from a gland that can't respond. TSH levels climb, while thyroid hormone levels stay low. You feel cold, tired, foggy. Your metabolism slows like a car running out of fuel. When your thyroid produces too much hormone, the opposite happens. The pituitary goes quiet, but the thyroid keeps working anyway, flooding your system with speed you can't control. Your heart races, your hands shake. Sleep becomes difficult because your body won't downshift. These aren't abstract failures. They're patterns doctors see daily, written in blood test results that reveal which conversations in your endocrine system have gone silent or started shouting. A single number, TSH, at 7 instead of 2, can explain months of unexplained exhaustion. Another number, free T4 elevated beyond normal range, can explain why someone feels wired despite doing nothing strenuous. Now shift your attention to a different axis, one that governs stress and survival. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, is your body's crisis management system. When threat appears, real or imagined, your hypothalamus releases corticotropin-releasing hormone. This prompts your pituitary to release ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, which travels through your blood to your adrenal glands. These glands sit on top of your kidneys like small caps, and they respond to ACTH by releasing cortisol. Cortisol is often called the stress hormone, but that label misses most of what it does. Yes, cortisol rises during stress, but it also rises every morning to wake you up. It helps regulate blood sugar, reduces inflammation, and influences memory formation. The problem isn't cortisol itself. The problem is when cortisol stays elevated too long, when the HPA axis can't shut off, because the perceived threat never ends. Chronic stress keeps the axis active. Cortisol remains high. Over time, this wears on your body in specific, measurable ways. Cortisol suppresses immune function because your body treats long-term threats as more urgent than fighting off a cold. It shifts fat storage toward your abdomen, preparing for famine that never comes. It interferes with sleep architecture because high cortisol at night contradicts the natural drop that allows deep rest. Memory suffers because elevated cortisol damages hippocampal neurons over time. The cruel efficiency of the stress response is that it borrows from the future to survive the present. That's fine for short bursts. A deer running from a predator doesn't need strong immunity or good sleep in that moment. It needs speed. But humans can maintain the stress response for months, even years, triggered not by predators but by jobs, relationships, money, uncertainty. The HPA axis doesn't distinguish between running from danger and worrying about it. The chemical response is the same. Cortisol's daily rhythm matters as much as its absolute level. In a healthy pattern, cortisol peaks shortly after waking, giving you the energy to start your day, then gradually declines through the afternoon and evening, reaching its lowest point around midnight. This rhythm syncs with your circadian clock, the internal timekeeper that coordinates thousands of biological processes with the day-night cycle. When cortisol rhythm flattens, either staying too high at night or too low in the morning, the consequences spread beyond stress. Energy becomes unpredictable. Sleep quality drops. Mood destabilizes. Or let's follow another thread, one that connects directly to how you experience hunger and fullness. Your pancreas, tucked behind your stomach, produces two hormones that work as partners and opposites. Insulin and glucagon manage your blood glucose, the primary fuel your cells run on. When you eat, glucose enters your bloodstream, and beta cells in your pancreas detect the rise. They respond by releasing insulin, which acts like a key, unlocking cell membranes so glucose can enter. Muscle cells take in glucose for energy. Fat cells take it in for storage. Your liver converts excess glucose to glycogen, a storable form of fuel. Insulin doesn't just manage glucose, it signals abundance. When insulin is present, your body interprets this as a time to store, build, and grow. Protein synthesis increases. Fat storage activates. Cell division speeds up. This makes sense in a world where food comes in waves, where a successful hunt means feast, and the next day might mean famine. Insulin says the feast is now. But when you haven't eaten for a while, blood glucose starts to drop. Alpha cells in your pancreas detect this decline and release glucagon, insulin's counterpart. Glucagon tells your liver to break down glycogen back into glucose and release it into your blood. It signals fat cells to release stored energy. It shifts your metabolism from storage mode to retrieval mode. The balance between insulin and glucagon keeps your blood sugar stable whether you've just eaten or haven't eaten in hours. This balance can break in ways that reshape lives. Type 1 diabetes occurs when the immune system destroys the beta cells that produce insulin. Without insulin, glucose can't enter most cells even though it's abundant in the blood. Blood sugar climbs dangerously high while cells starve. Before synthetic insulin, this was a death sentence. Even now, managing type 1 requires constant attention, measuring blood sugar, calculating insulin doses, anticipating how food and activity will shift the balance. Type 2, diabetes, follows a different path. Beta cells still produce insulin, often in large amounts, but cells become resistant to insulin signal. The key still fits the lock, but the lock is stiff, requiring more force to turn. The pancreas compensates by producing even more insulin, but this eventually exhausts the beta cells. Blood sugar rises. The body exists in a strange state of simultaneous abundance and scarcity. Glucose floods the bloodstream while tissues signal starvation. Insulin resistance doesn't appear overnight. It builds through years of patterns: excess calories, excess sugar, insufficient movement, chronic stress, poor sleep. Each factor nudges cells toward resistance, and the effects compound. What begins as slightly elevated fasting glucose, a number that looks almost normal, progresses to prediabetes, then crosses into diabetes. The transition can take a decade, which means intervention has time to work, but also means symptoms stay subtle until significant damage has occurred. Blood sugar regulation connects to almost every other hormone system. Cortisol raises blood sugar as part of the stress response, mobilizing energy for fight or flight. Growth hormone, released during deep sleep, also raises blood sugar overnight, which is why fasting glucose is measured in the morning. Thyroid hormones influence how quickly cells use glucose. Sex hormones affect insulin sensitivity. The pancreas doesn't operate alone. It's part of a network where every signal influences every other signal. Now consider growth hormone itself, another product of your pituitary gland. Despite its name, growth hormone does more than make children taller. It continues throughout life, promoting tissue repair, maintaining muscle mass, strengthening bones, supporting immune function. Growth hormone surges during deep sleep, particularly during the first few hours of the night. This is when your body does most of its physical restoration, repairing damage accumulated during the day. Growth hormone works partly by stimulating your liver to produce insulin like growth factor 1 or IGF-1. IGF-1 mediates many of growth hormone's effects, promoting cell growth and division throughout the body. In children, this drives skeletal growth, lengthening bones until growth plates close in late adolescence. In adults, it maintains tissues, keeping muscles functional and bones dense. The relationship between growth hormone and aging has fascinated researchers for decades. Growth hormone levels decline as people age, dropping significantly from youth to middle age. This decline correlates with some classic signs of aging: reduced muscle mass, increased body fat, thinner skin, decreased bone density. Some people interpreted this as cause and effect, assuming that supplementing growth hormone could reverse aging. The reality proved more complicated. Artificially raising growth hormone in adults does increase muscle mass and reduce fat. But it also brings side effects: fluid retention, joint pain, increased cancer risk because growth hormone promotes all cell division, including abnormal cells. The body's natural decline in growth hormone might be protective, a way of reducing cancer risk as accumulated cellular damage makes uncontrolled growth more likely. What looks like a deficiency might actually be wise regulation. Sleep and growth hormone are so tightly linked that sleep deprivation noticeably suppresses growth hormone release. Miss a night of sleep, and your body misses a crucial repair cycle. Do this repeatedly, and the effects accumulate. Children who don't sleep enough may grow more slowly. Adults lose muscle more easily, recover from exercise more poorly, and age faster in measurable ways. The hormone doesn't work in isolation. It works in the context of rest, in the specific brain states that characterize deep sleep. Your endocrine system operates on multiple timescales simultaneously. Some hormones, like adrenaline, spike and fade within minutes. Others, like thyroid hormones, maintain steady levels for days. Some follow daily rhythms, like cortisol and melatonin. Others follow longer cycles, like the monthly rise and fall of estrogen and progesterone. All of these rhythms layer on top of each other, creating patterns within patterns. Melatonin, produced by your pineal gland deep in your brain, serves as your body's darkness signal. As evening arrives and light fades, your pineal gland starts releasing melatonin into your bloodstream. Levels rise gradually through the night, peaking around 2 or 3 in the morning, then decline as dawn approaches. Melatonin doesn't force sleep directly, contrary to popular belief. Instead, it lowers your body temperature, reduces alertness, and shifts your physiology toward a state where sleep becomes easy. Artificial light disrupts the signal. Blue wavelengths, abundant in sunlight, but also in phone screens and LED bulbs, tell your brain it's daytime. Your pineal gland suppresses melatonin release. You feel alert when you shouldn't, and when you finally try to sleep, your body hasn't prepared. The hormone that should have been rising for hours starts from zero. This isn't insomnia in the traditional sense. It's a timing disorder, a mismatch between your biology and your behavior. Melatonin also serves functions beyond sleep. It's a potent antioxidant, protecting cells from damage. It modulates immune function, influencing how your body responds to infection and inflammation. Some research suggests it plays a role in regulating seasonal breeding in animals, responding to changing day length. In humans, these broader functions are less understood, but they hint that melatonin coordinates more than just sleep-wake cycles. The pineal gland itself is remarkable, a small pine cone-shaped structure that philosophers once thought was the seat of the soul. It's one of the few unpaired structures in your brain, sitting alone on the midline. It receives information about light, not through direct exposure, but through a pathway from your eyes to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, your brain's master clock, which then signals the pineal gland. This means blind individuals whose eyes can still detect light often maintain normal melatonin rhythms, while those with certain eye injuries may lose that rhythm entirely. Hormones also regulate appetite through a complex conversation between your gut, your fat tissue, and your brain. When your stomach is empty, cells in the stomach lining release ghrelin, often called the hunger hormone. Ghrelin travels through your blood to your hypothalamus, where it triggers hunger signals. You feel the urge to eat. After you eat, your stomach stretches and ghrelin release drops. But that's only part of the story. Your fat tissue produces leptin, a hormone that signals energy abundance. More body fat means higher leptin levels, which should tell your brain you have enough stored energy and don't need to eat as much. In theory, this creates a beautiful feedback system. Gain weight, leptin rises, appetite drops, weight stabilizes, lose weight, leptin falls, appetite rises, weight stabilizes. In practice, this system can break down. Many people with obesity have high leptin levels, but their brains don't respond to the signal. This is called leptin resistance, and it's similar in concept to insulin resistance. The hormone is present, even abundant, but the target tissues have stopped listening. The brain interprets this as starvation, even while surrounded by stored energy. Hunger stays high. Metabolism may slow. Weight loss becomes significantly harder because the body fights to defend a set point that's higher than healthy. Leptin resistance develops through mechanisms still being researched, but inflammation appears to play a role. Chronic low-grade inflammation, often associated with excess body fat, can interfere with leptin signaling in the hypothalamus. The very condition leptin is supposed to prevent obesity creates resistance to leptin signal. It's a feedback loop running backward, where the problem reinforces itself. Understanding hormone resistance, whether insulin resistance or leptin resistance, reveals something important about endocrine disorders. The problem isn't always hormone deficiency or excess. Sometimes the problem is communication breakdown. The signal is being sent, but it's not being received. Another hormone that shapes appetite is insulin itself. When you eat carbohydrates, blood glucose rises, insulin is released, and that insulin doesn't just open the door for glucose to enter cells. It also signals your brain that energy is coming in. Insulin acts as a satiety signal in the hypothalamus, telling you to stop eating. This is why insulin resistance affects not just blood sugar control, but also appetite regulation. When your brain stops responding properly to insulin signal, you may continue feeling hungry even after eating a substantial meal. The gut produces dozens of hormones that influence digestion, absorption, and appetite. One of the most studied is GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, which is released from intestinal cells when food arrives. GLP-1 slows gastric emptying, meaning your stomach empties more slowly into your intestines. This creates a feeling of fullness that lasts longer. It also stimulates insulin release from the pancreas and suppresses glucagon, the hormone that raises blood sugar. GLP-1 even acts on the brain to reduce appetite. This makes GLP-1 a powerful regulator of energy intake. Pharmaceutical companies have developed drugs that mimic GLP-1 or slow its breakdown, and these medications are used to treat type 2 diabetes and obesity with significant effectiveness. The discovery that a gut hormone could influence brain circuits controlling appetite was a turning point in understanding how the body manages energy balance. Your gut isn't just passively processing food. It's actively communicating with your brain, reporting on what's arriving, how much, and what kind. This communication shapes how much you eat, how satisfied you feel, and how your body decides to allocate energy. The entire digestive system functions as an endocrine organ, releasing signals that coordinate far beyond the gut itself. Stress hormones form another critical system, one that can override nearly every other process in your body. The primary stress hormone is cortisol, produced by your adrenal glands, which sit atop your kidneys. When you encounter a stressor, whether physical danger or psychological pressure, your hypothalamus releases corticotropin-releasing hormone, which travels to your pituitary gland. The pituitary releases adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, which travels through your blood to your adrenal glands. Your adrenals then release cortisol. This is called the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and it's one of the most important regulatory systems in your body. Cortisol does many things. It raises blood glucose by stimulating glucose production in your liver and reducing glucose uptake in muscles. It mobilizes amino acids from muscle tissue to provide building blocks for repair. It suppresses inflammation and modulates immune responses. It increases alertness and sharpens focus. All of these effects make sense in the context of an acute threat. You need energy available quickly. You need to think clearly. You need inflammation held in check so injuries don't swell immediately. Cortisol prepares you to respond, but cortisol was designed for short-term activation. The problem arises when stress becomes chronic. Modern life delivers psychological stress that your body interprets the same way it would interpret physical danger. Work pressure, financial worry, relationship conflict, these all activate the HPA axis. Cortisol levels stay elevated day after day, week after week. Chronic elevation of cortisol has consequences that ripple across systems. It interferes with insulin signaling, contributing to insulin resistance. It promotes fat storage, particularly visceral fat around your organs. It breaks down muscle tissue over time. It suppresses immune function, making you more susceptible to infections. It disrupts sleep by interfering with the normal nighttime drop in cortisol. It can even shrink ruptures in your brain involved in memory and emotional regulation, like the hippocampus. High cortisol also affects mood and cognition. Many people with chronic stress experience difficulty concentrating, memory problems, and mood disturbances. Depression and anxiety are associated with dysregulation of the HPA axis. Some individuals with depression have elevated cortisol levels, while others have blunted cortisol responses. The relationship is complex, but it's clear that stress, hormones, and mental health are deeply intertwined. Your adrenal glands produce another hormone in response to acute stress, adrenaline, also called epinephrine. Unlike cortisol, which takes minutes to rise and hours to fall, adrenaline acts within seconds. It's released directly into your bloodstream when your sympathetic nervous system activates. Adrenaline increases your heart rate, dilates airways in your lungs, redirects blood flow to your muscles, and triggers the breakdown of glycogen in your liver to release glucose. This is the fight-or-flight response, a rapid mobilization of resources to deal with the immediate danger. Adrenaline also sharpens your senses and speeds up your reaction time. It's why time seems to slow down during a car accident or a near miss. Your brain is processing information faster, and your body is primed to move. Once the danger passes, adrenaline levels drop quickly, usually within minutes. You might feel shaky, tired, or emotionally drained afterward as your body recovers from the intense activation. Chronic activation of the adrenaline system through repeated stress or anxiety can lead to cardiovascular problems. Your heart is repeatedly pushed into higher rates and higher pressures. Over time, this contributes to hypertension and increases the risk of heart disease. The body's emergency system, brilliant for short bursts, becomes damaging when it runs constantly. Sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen primarily, don't just control reproduction. They influence bone density, muscle mass, fat distribution, mood, cognitive function, and cardiovascular health. Testosterone, produced mainly in the testes in men and in smaller amounts in the ovaries and adrenal glands in women, promotes muscle growth and maintenance. It supports bone density by stimulating bone-forming cells. It influences libido and sexual function in both sexes. It also affects mood, with low testosterone often linked to depression, fatigue, and reduced motivation. Testosterone levels in men decline gradually with age, typically starting around age 30. This decline is natural, but significant drops can cause symptoms that affect quality of life. Some men experience fatigue, loss of muscle mass, increased body fat, reduced libido, and mood changes. This has led to interest in testosterone replacement therapy, which can be effective but also carries risks, including potential impacts on cardiovascular health and prostate tissue. In women, testosterone also plays important roles, though at much lower levels than in men. It contributes to muscle strength, bone density, and sexual desire. Women with very low testosterone can experience similar symptoms to men, including fatigue and reduced libido. Testosterone in women is produced by the ovaries and adrenal glands, and levels also decline with age, particularly after menopause. Estrogen, the primary female sex hormone, is produced mainly by the ovaries, though small amounts are made in fat tissue and the adrenal glands. Estrogen regulates the menstrual cycle, promotes the development of secondary sexual characteristics during puberty, and maintains bone density. It also affects the cardiovascular system, with estrogen generally providing protective effects on blood vessels and cholesterol levels. This is one reason heart disease risk increases in women after menopause. When estrogen levels drop sharply, estrogen influences brain function as well. It affects mood, memory, and cognitive processing. Many women notice mood changes at different points in their menstrual cycle linked to fluctuating estrogen and progesterone levels. During menopause, declining estrogen can contribute to mood disturbances, difficulty concentrating, and changes in sleep patterns. The brain has estrogen receptors in regions involved in emotion and cognition, so hormonal changes directly affect neural function. Progesterone, another key hormone in women, prepares the uterus for pregnancy and maintains early pregnancy. It also has calming effects on the brain, acting on receptors that reduce excitability. This is why some women feel more relaxed during the luteal phase of their cycle when progesterone is high. Conversely, the sharp drop in progesterone just before menstruation can contribute to premenstrual mood symptoms. Progesterone and estrogen work together and in opposition, creating a dynamic balance that shifts throughout the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle itself is an elegant hormonal conversation. It begins with the hypothalamus releasing gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which signals the pituitary gland to release follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. These hormones travel to the ovaries, where they stimulate follicle development and egg maturation. The growing follicles produce estrogen, which rises during the first half of the cycle. This rising estrogen eventually triggers a surge in luteinizing hormone, which causes ovulation. After ovulation, the empty follicle becomes the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone and some estrogen during the second half of the cycle. If pregnancy doesn't occur, the corpus luteum breaks down, progesterone and estrogen drop, and menstruation begins. The cycle then starts over. This cycle is controlled by feedback loops. Rising estrogen during the first half of the cycle eventually triggers positive feedback, where more estrogen leads to an LH surge. After ovulation, progesterone provides negative feedback, suppressing FSH and LH to prevent additional ovulations. When progesterone drops at the end of the cycle, this negative feedback is removed, allowing FSH to rise again and start a new cycle. This intricate dance of hormones, feedback, and timing is easily disrupted. Stress, weight changes, illness, and certain medications can all interfere with the menstrual cycle. Polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, is a common endocrine disorder in women of reproductive age. It's characterized by irregular menstrual cycles, elevated androgen levels, including testosterone, and often multiple small cysts on the ovaries. The exact cause isn't fully understood, but insulin resistance plays a significant role. High insulin levels stimulate the ovaries to produce excess androgens, which disrupt normal follicle development and ovulation. This creates a cycle where hormonal imbalance perpetuates itself. Women with PCOS often experience symptoms beyond irregular periods. Excess androgens can cause acne, excess hair growth on the face and body, and male pattern hair loss. The insulin resistance associated with PCOS increases the risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Many women with PCOS also struggle with weight management, and obesity can worsen insulin resistance, creating another reinforcing loop. Treatment often focuses on managing insulin resistance through diet, exercise, and sometimes medications like metformin. Thyroid hormones, produced by your thyroid gland in your neck, regulate your metabolic rate, the speed at which your cells burn energy. Your thyroid produces mainly T4, thyroxine, which is converted in tissues throughout your body into T3, triiodothyronine, the more active form. These hormones influence nearly every cell, increasing oxygen consumption, heat production, and the rate of chemical reactions. When thyroid hormone levels are optimal, your metabolism hums along efficiently. When levels are too high or too low, the effects are widespread. Hypothyroidism, insufficient thyroid hormone production, causes your metabolism to slow. Symptoms include fatigue, weight gain, cold intolerance, constipation, dry skin, hair loss, and depression. Everything feels sluggish because your cells aren't producing energy efficiently. The most common cause of hypothyroidism in developed countries is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, an autoimmune condition where your immune system attacks your thyroid gland. Over time, this damage reduces the gland's ability to produce hormones. Hyperthyroidism, excess thyroid hormone production, causes your metabolism to speed up. Symptoms include weight loss despite increased appetite, heat intolerance, sweating, rapid heartbeat, anxiety, tremors, and difficulty sleeping. Your body is running too fast, burning through energy and resources faster than it should. Graves' disease, another autoimmune condition, is a common cause of hyperthyroidism. In Graves' disease, antibodies stimulate the thyroid gland to produce excessive hormones. Thyroid hormone production is regulated by the hypothalamus and pituitary through another feedback loop. Your hypothalamus releases thyrotropin-releasing hormone, which signals your pituitary to release thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH. TSH travels to your thyroid gland and stimulates hormone production. When thyroid hormone levels rise, they provide negative feedback to your hypothalamus and pituitary, reducing TRH and TSH release. This keeps thyroid hormones within a narrow range. If your thyroid gland is damaged and can't produce enough hormone, TSH levels rise as your pituitary tries harder to stimulate the failing gland. This is why TSH is often the first test used to screen for thyroid problems. Growth hormone, released by your pituitary gland, promotes growth during childhood and adolescence and continues to play important roles throughout life. It stimulates cell reproduction, tissue repair, and bone growth. It also influences metabolism, promoting protein synthesis and fat breakdown. Growth hormone is released in pulses, with the largest pulses occurring during deep sleep. This is one reason sleep is so important during periods of rapid growth. Growth hormone levels naturally decline with age, contributing to decreased muscle mass, increased body fat, and reduced bone density in older adults. This decline is part of normal aging, though its effects vary significantly between individuals. Excessive growth hormone, often from a pituitary tumor, causes different effects depending on when it occurs. In children whose growth plates haven't closed, excess growth hormone causes gigantism, resulting in abnormally tall stature. In adults whose growth plates have closed, excess growth hormone causes acromegaly. Bones can't lengthen anymore, but they thicken. Hands and feet enlarge, facial features coarsen, and internal organs grow larger. Joint pain develops as bones and cartilage expand. Left untreated, acromegaly increases the risk of diabetes, heart disease, and early death. Melatonin, produced by a pineal gland deep in your brain, regulates your sleep-wake cycle. Production increases in darkness and decreases in light, signaling to your body when it's time to sleep. Light enters your eyes and travels to a brain region called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your master biological clock. This clock suppresses melatonin production during daylight and allows it to rise as darkness falls. Melatonin doesn't force you to sleep, but it opens the gate for sleep to occur, making you feel drowsy and priming your body for rest. Modern life disrupts this system. Artificial light, especially blue light from screens, suppresses melatonin production even at night. Your brain interprets this light as a signal that it's still daytime. This is why scrolling through your phone before bed makes it harder to fall asleep. Your melatonin production is delayed, shifting your circadian rhythm later. Melatonin supplements are sometimes used to treat jet lag or shift work-sleep disorder, helping reset your internal clock. They're most effective when timed correctly, taken several hours before your desired bedtime. But supplements don't fix the underlying issue of light exposure at inappropriate times. Vitamin D functions more like a hormone than a traditional vitamin. Your skin produces it when exposed to sunlight, specifically UVB radiation. Vitamin D influences calcium absorption in your intestines and calcium deposition in your bones. It also affects immune function, cell growth, and inflammation. Without adequate vitamin D, calcium absorption drops, leading to weak, soft bones. In children, this causes rickets. In adults, it causes osteomalacia, bone pain, and muscle weakness. Many people, especially those living far from the equator or spending most time indoors, have insufficient vitamin D levels. This deficiency may contribute to increased risk of infections, autoimmune diseases, and certain cancers, though research continues. Supplementation is straightforward and often recommended, particularly during winter months when sunlight exposure is limited. Parathyroid hormone, produced by 4 tiny glands embedded in your thyroid, works closely with vitamin D to regulate calcium levels. When blood calcium drops, your parathyroid glands release PTH. This hormone increases calcium absorption from your intestines, reduces calcium loss through your kidneys, and releases calcium from your bones into your bloodstream. It also stimulates vitamin D activation, enhancing calcium absorption further. The system maintains blood calcium within a narrow range because calcium is critical for nerve signaling, muscle contraction, and blood clotting. Parathyroid problems are less common than thyroid problems, but can be serious. Hyperparathyroidism, excessive PTH production, causes too much calcium to be pulled from bones, leading to osteoporosis, kidney stones, and elevated blood calcium that affects heart and brain function. Symptoms include fatigue, bone pain, kidney problems, and confusion. Hypoparathyroidism, insufficient PTH, causes low blood calcium, leading to muscle cramps, spasms, and tingling sensations. Severe cases can cause seizures. Aldosterone produced by your adrenal glands regulates sodium and potassium balance, which directly affects blood pressure and fluid balance. It acts on your kidneys, increasing sodium reabsorption and potassium excretion. When sodium is retained, water follows, increasing the blood volume and blood pressure. Aldosterone secretion is controlled by the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. When blood pressure drops or sodium levels fall, your kidneys release renin. Renin converts a blood protein into angiotensin 1, which is then converted to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 stimulates aldosterone release and also constricts blood vessels, raising blood pressure through multiple mechanisms. This system is critical for maintaining blood pressure during dehydration, blood loss, or when standing up quickly. Medications that block this system, ACE inhibitors and ARBs, are commonly used to treat high blood pressure and heart failure. Leptin and ghrelin work as opposing signals in appetite regulation. Leptin, produced by fat cells, signals satiety. As your fat stores increase, leptin levels rise, telling your brain you have sufficient energy reserves. Ghrelin, produced primarily in your stomach, signals hunger. Levels rise before meals and drop after eating. This system should maintain energy balance, but it often doesn't work as simply as it seems. Many people with obesity have high leptin levels, but they don't respond to it normally. This condition, called leptin resistance, means the brain doesn't receive the satiety signal despite abundant energy stores. The mechanisms behind leptin resistance aren't completely understood, but chronic inflammation and consistently high leptin levels may desensitize receptors. Ghrelin levels don't always drop as expected after eating, particularly after consuming processed foods high in sugar and refined carbohydrates. This can leave you feeling hungry soon after a meal, even though you've consumed plenty of calories. Sleep deprivation disrupts both leptin and ghrelin, increasing hunger and appetite. After just one night of poor sleep, ghrelin rises and leptin falls, making you hungrier and less satisfied by food. This is one reason chronic sleep deprivation contributes to weight gain. Your body is receiving hormonal signals to eat more, even when energy stores are adequate. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, is produced by your hypothalamus and released by your pituitary gland. It's best known for its role in childbirth and breastfeeding. During labor, oxytocin causes uterine contractions. During breastfeeding, it triggers milk ejection from the mammary glands. But oxytocin's effects extend far beyond reproduction. It's released during positive social interactions, physical touch, and moments of emotional connection. It promotes trust, reduces anxiety, and strengthens social bonds. The surge of oxytocin after childbirth helps mothers bond with their newborns. Similar releases occur during intimate moments between partners, reinforcing pair bonds. Oxytocin also has anti-stress effects. It reduces cortisol levels and activates calming pathways in your brain. This is part of why social support and physical affection help people cope with stress. Research suggests oxytocin may play a role in various mental health conditions, and synthetic oxytocin is being studied as a potential treatment for autism, social anxiety, and other disorders. However, oxytocin's effects are complex and context-dependent. It doesn't simply make everyone friendlier It can also increase defensive behaviors toward outsiders when protecting one's social group. Vasopressin, also called antidiuretic hormone, is produced by your hypothalamus and released by your pituitary. It regulates water balance by controlling how much water your kidneys reabsorb. When you're dehydrated, vasopressin levels rise, signaling your kidneys to retain water and produce concentrated urine. When you're well hydrated, vasopressin levels drop and your kidneys excrete more water, producing dilute urine. Alcohol inhibits vasopressin release, which is why drinking causes frequent urination and contributes to dehydration and hangovers. Vasopressin also constricts blood vessels, raising blood pressure. This is useful during blood loss or dehydration when maintaining blood pressure is critical. Problems with vasopressin production or kidney response cause diabetes insipidus, completely different from diabetes mellitus. In diabetes insipidus, the kidneys can't retain water properly, leading to excessive urination and constant thirst. Without treatment, severe dehydration develops quickly. Prolactin, another pituitary hormone, primarily regulates milk production in women after childbirth. During pregnancy, prolactin levels rise, preparing mammary glands for lactation. After delivery, prolactin works with oxytocin to establish and maintain milk supply. Suckling stimulates prolactin release, ensuring continued milk production as long as breastfeeding continues. In men and non-pregnant women, prolactin levels are normally low. Elevated prolactin, hyperprolactinemia, can occur due to pituitary tumors, certain medications, or other conditions. High prolactin suppresses reproductive hormones, causing irregular periods or absence of periods in women and reduced testosterone and sexual dysfunction in men. It can also cause inappropriate milk production. Androgens, male sex hormones with testosterone being the primary one, are produced mainly in the testes in men and in smaller amounts by the adrenal glands in both sexes. In women, ovaries also produce small amounts. Testosterone drives the development of male characteristics during puberty, including deepening voice, facial hair growth, muscle mass increase, and bone growth. It maintains these characteristics throughout life and also influences libido, sperm production, and mood. Testosterone levels naturally decline with age, starting around age 30. This gradual decline is normal, but low testosterone can cause symptoms including reduced libido, erectile dysfunction, decreased muscle mass, increased body fat, fatigue, and mood changes. The line between normal aging and problematic deficiency isn't always clear. Testosterone replacement therapy is increasingly common, but not without risks, including potential effects on prostate health, cardiovascular risk, and fertility. In women, androgens contribute to libido and bone strength. Excess androgens, as seen in PCOS, cause masculinizing effects. The balance matters more than absolute levels. Estrogens are primarily female sex hormones, though men produce them in small amounts too. Estradiol is the main estrogen during reproductive years, produced by ovarian follicles. Estrogen drives female sexual development during puberty, including breast development, widening of hips, and the start of menstruation. Throughout reproductive years, estrogen regulates the menstrual cycle, prepares the uterus for pregnancy, and maintains bone density. Estrogen levels fluctuate throughout the menstrual cycle, rising during the follicular phase and peaking just before ovulation. During menopause, estrogen production drops dramatically. This decline causes the symptoms many women experience: hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, mood changes, and accelerated bone loss. The transition isn't sudden. Perimenopause, the years leading up to menopause, involves fluctuating hormone levels and irregular periods. Some women transition smoothly with minimal symptoms. Others experience significant disruption to daily life. Hormone replacement therapy can alleviate menopausal symptoms by supplementing declining estrogen levels. The decision to use HRT involves weighing benefits against risks, including potential increased risk of blood clots, stroke, and certain cancers, depending on the type of therapy and individual risk factors. The relationship between hormones and cancer is complex. Some cancers are hormone sensitive, meaning their growth is influenced by hormone levels. Breast cancer cells often have receptors for estrogen and progesterone. When these hormones bind to receptors, they can stimulate cancer cell growth. This is why some breast cancer treatments work by blocking hormone receptors or reducing hormone production. Prostate cancer is often androgen sensitive. Testosterone can fuel prostate cancer growth, which is why treatment sometimes involves reducing testosterone levels through medication or surgical removal of the testes. These approaches don't cure cancer, but they can slow its progression. Not all cancers of these organs are hormone sensitive, and not all hormone-sensitive cancers respond to hormone-based treatments. Endocrine disruptors are chemicals that interfere with hormone function. They're found in many common products, including plastics, pesticides, cosmetics, and household cleaners. These chemicals can mimic hormones, block hormone receptors, or alter hormone production and metabolism. The effects of endocrine disruptors are concerning because they can occur at very low doses and during critical developmental windows. Exposure during pregnancy or early childhood may affect reproductive development, brain development, and metabolism, with effects potentially lasting into adulthood. Bisphenol A, BPA, found in some plastics, mimics estrogen. Phthalates, used to soften plastics and in fragrances, may affect testosterone production. Certain pesticides disrupt thyroid function. The cumulative effect of exposure to multiple endocrine disruptors throughout life is difficult to study, but potentially significant. Reducing exposure involves choosing products carefully, avoiding heating food in plastic containers, choosing fresh foods over canned when possible, and being mindful of personal care product ingredients. The timing of hormone exposure matters profoundly. Your body's sensitivity to hormones varies across your lifespan. During fetal development, precise hormone timing drives the formation of organs and body structures. Disruption during these critical windows can cause permanent changes. Puberty represents another sensitive period when hormones trigger rapid physical and neurological changes. The adolescent brain is particularly responsive to sex hormones, which influence not just physical maturation, but also emotional regulation, risk-taking behavior, and social development. This is why adolescence is such a turbulent time, emotionally and behaviorally. Stress during childhood and adolescence can alter the developing stress response system, potentially affecting how someone responds to stress throughout life. Early life adversity is associated with changes in cortisol regulation and increased risk of anxiety and depression in adulthood. Your hormone environment shapes your brain and body in ways that echo forward through time. Hormones communicate not just within your body, but between bodies. Pheromones are chemical signals that carry information between individuals of the same species. While their role in human behavior is debated and likely subtler than in other animals, evidence suggests humans do respond to chemical signals from others. Women living together often experience menstrual cycle synchronization, though the mechanisms remain unclear. Compounds in sweat may influence mood and physiological responses in others. The smell of a romantic partner can affect stress levels and sleep quality. These effects operate below conscious awareness, shaping social interactions through channels we rarely acknowledge. The gut produces hormones that influence hunger and satiety. Your digestive system isn't just processing food. It's an active endocrine organ secreting hormones that communicate with your brain about energy status. Ghrelin, produced mainly in the stomach, signals hunger. Its levels rise before meals and drop after eating. Leptin, produced by fat cells, signals satiety and long-term energy stores. These hormones help regulate body weight by influencing appetite and metabolism. When this system functions properly, hunger arises when energy is needed and satisfaction follows adequate intake. Disruptions to these signals contribute to weight gain and difficulty maintaining weight loss. After weight loss, leptin levels drop, triggering increased hunger and decreased metabolism. Ghrelin levels rise, intensifying hunger signals. This biological response makes sustained weight loss challenging. Your body interprets weight loss as a threat to survival and activates mechanisms to restore previous weight. Understanding these hormonal responses explains why willpower alone often fails against powerful biological drives. The hunger hormone system involves far more than ghrelin and leptin. Your gut produces dozens of hormones that influence appetite, digestion, and metabolism. Peptide, YY, and glucagon-like peptide, one promotes satiety and slow gastric emptying. Cholecystokinin triggers the release of digestive enzymes and contributes to feeling full. These hormones work in concert, creating a complex signaling network between gut and brain. Eating patterns influence these signals. Frequent small meals create different hormonal patterns than fewer larger meals. High-protein foods trigger stronger satiety signals than refined carbohydrates. Fiber slows digestion and extends the release of satiety hormones. The composition and timing of meals shapes the hormonal messages your gut sends your brain. Gut bacteria influence hormone production. The trillions of microbes in your intestines don't just help digest food, they produce compounds that affect hormone signaling. Certain bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids that influence metabolism and insulin sensitivity. Gut microbes can modify bile acids in ways that affect metabolic hormones. They produce neurotransmitters that communicate with the nervous system. The composition of your gut microbiome may influence weight regulation, blood sugar control, and even mood through these hormonal pathways. Diet shapes gut bacteria, which in turn influences hormones, creating a feedback loop between what you eat, who lives in your gut, and how your body regulates energy. Sleep deprivation disrupts hormone balance across multiple systems. A single night of poor sleep alters leptin and ghrelin levels, increasing hunger and preference for high-calorie foods the next day. Chronic sleep restriction impairs insulin sensitivity, raising diabetes risk. Sleep loss elevates cortisol, potentially contributing to weight gain and difficulty losing weight. Growth hormone, released during deep sleep, is reduced when sleep is disrupted. This affects tissue repair, muscle maintenance, and metabolism. The relationship between sleep and hormones creates a cycle. Poor sleep disrupts hormones, and hormonal imbalances can worsen sleep quality. Addressing sleep becomes crucial for metabolic and endocrine health. Light exposure influences hormones beyond melatonin. Bright light exposure during the day helps maintain circadian rhythm, which regulates cortisol, growth hormone, and other hormones that follow daily cycles. Morning light exposure can improve mood and sleep quality. Evening exposure to bright light, especially blue light from screens, suppresses melatonin and delays sleep onset. This disrupts the natural hormone rhythm, potentially affecting metabolism and recovery. Shift workers who experience irregular light exposure often develop metabolic problems, partly due to chronic disruption of hormone cycles. The timing of light exposure matters as much as the amount. Exercise creates immediate and lasting changes to hormone levels. During physical activity, cortisol and adrenaline rise to mobilize energy stores. Growth hormone increases, supporting tissue repair and adaptation. After intense exercise, testosterone and growth hormone remain elevated for hours, supporting recovery and muscle building. Regular exercise improves insulin sensitivity, helping cells respond more effectively to insulin signals. Exercise also influences hunger hormones. Intense activity temporarily suppresses ghrelin, reducing appetite. Regular physical activity helps regulate leptin sensitivity, improving the body's ability to recognize satiety signals. The type, intensity, and timing of exercise all influence which hormonal responses dominate. Endurance exercise creates different hormonal patterns than strength training. High-intensity interval training triggers different responses than steady-state cardio. These variations allow exercise to be tailored toward specific hormonal goals. Cold exposure activates hormones involved in metabolism and stress adaptation. When exposed to cold, norepinephrine surges, triggering shivering and activating brown fat, a specialized tissue that burns calories to generate heat. Regular cold exposure may increase brown fat activity and improve metabolic health. Cold also stimulates the release of hormones that help the body adapt to stress. Some research suggests cold exposure can improve mood and increase resilience to other stressors, though the mechanisms remain under investigation. Heat exposure through activities like sauna use creates different hormonal responses. Heat stress triggers the release of heat shock proteins that protect cells and may have anti-aging effects. Growth hormone levels increase during and after heat exposure. Regular sauna use has been associated with improved cardiovascular health and reduced mortality risk, with hormonal responses likely playing a role. Social connection influences hormone release in profound ways. Physical touch, especially with trusted others, triggers oxytocin release. This creates feelings of bonding and reduces stress hormones. The effects are measurable. Hugging, hand-holding, and other forms of affectionate touch lower cortisol and blood pressure. Massage has similar effects. Even petting animals can trigger oxytocin release and reduce stress hormones. Social isolation has the opposite effect. Loneliness is associated with elevated cortisol, increased inflammation, and changes to immune function. The hormonal impact of chronic loneliness may contribute to its association with increased disease risk and mortality. Your social environment isn't separate from your physiology. It actively shapes your hormonal state. Laughter triggers endorphin release, creating feelings of pleasure and reducing pain perception. Shared laughter strengthens social bonds partly through synchronized hormone responses. Humor and playfulness may serve evolutionary functions related to social cohesion and stress management. The physical act of laughing activates multiple body systems, creating measurable changes to hormone levels and immune function. Music influences hormone release. Listening to music you enjoy triggers dopamine release in reward centers of the brain. Music can reduce cortisol levels and influence heart rate and blood pressure through effects on the nervous system and hormone release. Singing, especially in groups, appears to promote oxytocin release and reduce stress hormones. The emotional and social aspects of music listening and performance create hormonal responses that affect mood and well-being. Meditation and mindfulness practices influence stress hormone levels. Regular meditation is associated with reduced cortisol and changes to brain regions involved in stress response. The effects build over time with consistent practice. Different meditation techniques may create different hormonal responses. Loving kindness meditation appears particularly effective at increasing oxytocin and reducing inflammatory markers. Mindfulness practices may improve hormone regulation by increasing awareness of bodily signals, allowing more effective responses to stress before it escalates. Breathing patterns directly influence nervous system activity and hormone release. Slow, deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing cortisol and adrenaline. Fast, shallow breathing does the opposite, activating stress responses. Controlled breathing techniques can be used to intentionally shift hormonal state, reducing anxiety and improving emotional regulation. The mechanism involves direct effects on brainstem centers that control both breathing and autonomic nervous system activity. By changing breathing patterns, you change neural signaling, which changes hormone release. Your perception of stress influences its hormonal impact. Viewing a challenging situation as a threat versus a challenge creates different physiological responses. Threat perception triggers stronger cortisol responses and may impair performance. Challenge perception, seeing stress as something you can handle, moderates the hormonal response and can enhance performance. This isn't about positive thinking overriding biology. It's about how cognitive appraisal influences the specific biological response activated. The same external situation can trigger different hormonal patterns depending on how you interpret it. This is why stress management techniques that change perception can have measurable physiological effects. Chronic inflammation and hormones interact in complex ways. Inflammatory cytokines influence hormone production and signaling. Chronic inflammation can impair insulin sensitivity, disrupt thyroid function and affect sex hormone production. Conversely, some hormones have anti-inflammatory effects. Cortisol suppresses inflammation, which is why synthetic corticosteroids are used to treat inflammatory conditions. The timing matters though. Acute cortisol response to stress has anti-inflammatory effects, but chronic elevation may promote inflammation. Estrogen has anti-inflammatory properties in some contexts, which may explain why some inflammatory conditions change across the menstrual cycle or worsen after menopause. Autoimmune diseases show strong connections to hormones. Many autoimmune conditions are more common in women and often fluctuate with hormonal changes. Rheumatoid arthritis symptoms may improve during pregnancy when certain hormones are elevated, then flare after delivery. Multiple sclerosis often shows remission during pregnancy. Lupus flares are associated with hormonal fluctuations. These patterns suggest sex hormones influence immune system activity. The mechanisms are complex and not fully understood, but involve effects on immune cell function and inflammatory signaling. Understanding these connections may lead to new treatment approaches for autoimmune diseases. Hormones influence bone health throughout life. Estrogen and testosterone both support bone density by regulating the balance between bone formation and breakdown. During growth, these hormones help bones reach peak density. In adulthood, they maintain bone strength. After menopause, declining estrogen accelerates bone loss, increasing osteoporosis risk. Men also experience age-related bone loss as testosterone gradually declines. Growth hormone and thyroid hormones also affect bone metabolism. Too much or too little thyroid hormone can weaken bones. Growth hormone deficiency in childhood prevents normal bone development. The intricate hormonal regulation of bone demonstrates how a seemingly simple tissue depends on multiple hormone signals working in coordination. Calcium and vitamin D interact with hormones to regulate bone health. Parathyroid hormone increases when blood calcium drops, triggering calcium release from bones and increased calcium absorption from food. Vitamin D, technically a hormone, is essential for calcium absorption. Without adequate vitamin D, you cannot effectively absorb dietary calcium regardless of intake. This is why vitamin D deficiency leads to bone problems. The system involves constant feedback between calcium levels, parathyroid hormone, vitamin D, and bone. Understanding this helps explain why bone health requires not just calcium supplementation, but adequate vitamin D and hormonal balance. Aging involves changes to nearly every hormonal system. Growth hormone and IGF-1 decline with age, affecting muscle mass, skin thickness, and metabolism. Sex hormone production gradually decreases in both men and women. Thyroid function may decline. Insulin sensitivity typically worsens. These changes are partly why aging is associated with increased disease risk, decreased muscle mass, and changes in body composition. Some age-related hormonal changes may be adaptive, representing the body's response to changing needs rather than simple decline. The evolutionary perspective suggests organisms may be programmed to allocate resources differently at different life stages. Whether age-related hormonal changes are problems to fix or natural adaptations remains debated. Hormone replacement in aging is controversial. Some advocate replacing declining hormones to maintain youthful levels, arguing this prevents age-related decline. Others worry about disrupting natural aging processes and potentially increasing disease risk. For growth hormone, evidence of benefit is limited and risks include increased cancer risk. For testosterone replacement in aging men, benefits may include increased muscle mass and improved libido, but risks include cardiovascular concerns. Each hormone and individual situation requires careful consideration of evidence and personal factors. The field of endocrine disruptors has expanded dramatically as researchers identify more chemicals that interfere with hormones. Flame retardants, non-stick coatings, stain-resistant treatments, and many other common chemicals show endocrine disrupting properties. The challenge is that these chemicals are ubiquitous in modern environments. Complete avoidance is nearly impossible. Regulatory approaches vary between countries, with some banning certain chemicals while others allow continued use. The precautionary principle suggests limiting exposure where possible, especially during pregnancy and early childhood, even when evidence of harm is not yet conclusive. This reflects the difficulty of proving cause and effect when exposures are universal and effects may take decades to manifest. Microplastics represent an emerging concern for endocrine health. These tiny plastic particles are found throughout the environment and in human bodies. Some contain or absorb endocrine disrupting chemicals. The health effects of microplastic exposure are largely unknown, but the persistence of these materials and their potential to deliver hormone-disrupting chemicals directly into tissues raises concerns. Research is ongoing, but the widespread contamination of food, water, and air with microplastics means exposure is nearly universal. The long-term consequences remain one of the great unknowns of modern environmental health. Hormones influence pain perception. Estrogen and progesterone affect pain sensitivity, which is why pain conditions often fluctuate with the menstrual cycle. Migraines, for example, are often triggered by hormonal changes. Endorphins, the body's natural pain relievers, are influenced by stress, exercise, and other factors that affect hormone release. Chronic pain can disrupt hormone balance, creating feedback loops where pain leads to stress, which alters hormones, which affects pain perception. Understanding these connections helps explain why pain management often requires addressing multiple systems, not just the source of pain signals. Your hormonal fingerprint is unique. While general patterns hold across people, individual variation is substantial. Baseline hormone levels, receptor sensitivity, metabolism rates, and feedback mechanisms all vary. This is why the same hormonal environment can produce different effects in different people. It also explains why treatment responses vary. What works for one person may not work for another, even with seemingly identical hormone levels. Personalized medicine attempts to account for this individual variation, tailoring treatments to specific biological profiles rather than applying one-size-fits-all approaches. The field of chrononutrition examines how meal timing affects hormones. Eating at consistent times helps maintain circadian rhythm alignment, while erratic meal patterns can disrupt metabolic hormones. Insulin sensitivity varies throughout the day, typically higher in morning than evening. This suggests breakfast may be metabolically different from dinner, even with identical foods. Studies show eating most calories earlier in the day may improve metabolic outcomes compared to evening heavy eating patterns. The mechanism likely involves alignment between food intake and circadian hormone rhythms. Your body expects food at certain times, and eating outside those windows may create metabolic confusion. Night shift workers face particular challenges as their eating patterns are misaligned with natural light-dark cycles. This contributes to increased metabolic disease risk in shift workers. The solution isn't just what you eat, but when. Fasting creates a distinct hormonal state. During fasting, insulin drops while glucagon rises, shifting metabolism from storage to mobilization. Growth hormone increases during fasting, helping preserve muscle mass while accessing fat stores. Cortisol rises to maintain blood sugar. These changes represent coordinated metabolic reprogramming. Extended fasting triggers autophagy, a cellular cleanup process regulated by hormonal signals. Some research suggests periodic fasting may have benefits beyond simple calorie restriction, possibly through these hormonal mechanisms. However, fasting isn't appropriate for everyone. Children, pregnant women, and people with certain medical conditions shouldn't fast without medical guidance. The hormonal benefits of fasting must be balanced against potential risks and individual circumstances. Exercise is a hormonal intervention. During exercise, multiple hormones shift to support increased energy demands. Cortisol rises to mobilize fuel. Adrenaline increases to enhance cardiovascular output. Growth hormone and testosterone increase to support muscle adaptation. After exercise, these hormones gradually return to baseline, but repeated exercise training creates lasting changes in hormonal patterns. Trained individuals often have improved insulin sensitivity and different baseline hormone levels compared to sedentary people. Different exercise types create different hormonal responses. High-intensity interval training produces different hormonal patterns than steady endurance exercise or resistance training. This is why varied exercise may provide broader benefits than single modality training. Your workout is essentially a hormone optimization session, though we rarely think of it that way. Sleep deprivation disrupts virtually every hormonal system. Just one night of poor sleep impairs insulin sensitivity. Chronic sleep restriction increases cortisol, decreases testosterone, alters thyroid function, and disrupts appetite hormones. The magnitude of these effects is substantial. Sleep-deprived individuals show metabolic changes similar to pre-diabetes after just a few nights of restricted sleep. These changes reverse with sleep recovery, but chronic sleep debt creates sustained hormonal dysfunction. Modern society often treats sleep as negotiable, but from a hormonal perspective, sleep is as fundamental as nutrition. The phrase, "I'll sleep when I'm dead," ignores that poor sleep accelerates the path to that endpoint through hormonal mechanisms. Sleep isn't downtime. It's when crucial hormonal regulation occurs. Meditation and mindfulness practices measurably affect stress hormones. Regular meditation reduces cortisol levels and may improve cortisol rhythm, with better morning peaks and evening declines. The mechanism likely involves reduced activation of stress pathways in the brain. Meditation doesn't eliminate stress, but it appears to change how the body responds to stressors. Some research suggests meditation may affect other hormones beyond cortisol, including changes in inflammatory markers and possibly sex hormones. The effects aren't immediate. Most studies showing clear hormonal changes involve consistent practice over weeks or months. This suggests meditation creates gradual recalibration of stress response systems rather than acute effects. In a world of chronic stressors, practices that recalibrate stress hormones have clear health implications. Social connection affects hormones in surprising ways. Positive social interactions increase oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone. This isn't just about romantic relationships. Friendship, community involvement, and even positive interactions with strangers can trigger oxytocin release. Loneliness, conversely, affects stress hormones and inflammation. Chronic social isolation produces measurable changes in cortisol patterns and immune function. These effects help explain why social connection is consistently linked to better health outcomes and longer life. We are social creatures at a biological level, and our hormonal systems reflect this. The quality of your relationships isn't just about happiness. It's literally affecting your endocrine function. Modern increases in loneliness may have hormonal health consequences we're only beginning to understand. Temperature exposure influences hormones. Cold exposure increases noradrenaline and may increase metabolism through brown fat activation. Some research suggests regular cold exposure may improve insulin sensitivity. Heat exposure, such as sauna use, creates different hormonal responses, including increases in growth hormone and changes in stress hormones. These practices have been used traditionally in many cultures, and modern research is uncovering potential mechanisms. The effects aren't dramatic enough to replace other healthy behaviors, but they suggest environmental temperature is another variable affecting hormonal function. Modern climate-controlled environments may eliminate natural temperature variations that historically influenced our hormones. Whether this matters for health remains unclear, but it's another example of how modern life differs from the environment our hormonal systems evolved in. Exposure to natural light, especially morning sunlight, helps regulate circadian rhythms through effects on melatonin and cortisol. The eyes contain specialized cells that detect light and send signals to the brain's circadian clock. Morning bright light advances circadian phase, helping you wake earlier. Evening bright light delays phase, making you stay up later. Modern light exposure patterns, with dim mornings and bright evenings from screens, push circadian rhythms later. This misalignment affects not just sleep, but all circadian regulated hormones. The solution is deceptively simple. Get bright light exposure early in the day, preferably from natural sunlight. Dim lights in the evening. This basic pattern helps maintain proper hormone timing. It costs nothing and requires no supplements, yet many people never optimize this fundamental aspect of hormonal health. Altitude affects hormones. At high altitude, the body increases erythropoietin to stimulate red blood cell production, improving oxygen carrying capacity. Other hormones change as well, including alterations in thyroid function and metabolism. Athletes sometimes train at altitude to trigger these adaptations, though the benefits are debated. People living at high altitude show different hormonal profiles than sea-level dwellers. Whether these differences affect health is complex. Some studies suggest altitude may have metabolic benefits, while others show increased stress on the cardiovascular system. The human body is remarkably adaptable, adjusting hormone production to maintain function across diverse environments. This plasticity is both a strength and a challenge when environments change faster than adaptation can occur. Noise pollution affects stress hormones. Chronic noise exposure, such as living near airports or highways, increases cortisol levels. The effect persists even when people report being used to the noise. Sleep disruption from noise is particularly problematic as it combines two stressors. Noise isn't just annoying, it's a biological stressor that affects endocrine function. Urban planning that reduces noise exposure isn't just about quality of life. It has measurable health impacts through effects on stress hormones. This is another example of how modern environments create subtle but persistent stressors that our hormonal systems weren't designed to handle. The cumulative effect of multiple environmental stressors may help explain why certain health conditions are more common in urban environments, even after accounting for other factors. Air pollution affects multiple hormonal systems. Particulate matter exposure is linked to insulin resistance, thyroid dysfunction, and disrupted stress hormone patterns. The mechanisms likely involve inflammation and oxidox stress, which interfere with normal hormonal signaling. Children exposed to high air pollution show altered growth patterns, possibly through effects on growth hormone and thyroid function. Pregnant women exposed to pollution have increased risk of gestational diabetes and other hormonal complications. These effects are subtle on an individual level, but significant at population scale. Improving air quality isn't just about respiratory health. It has broader effects on endocrine function and metabolic health. The hormonal effects of air pollution represent another way modern environmental challenges affect ancient biological systems. Psychological stress affects hormones beyond just cortisol. Chronic stress can alter thyroid function, sex hormone production, and growth hormone release. The mechanisms are complex, involving both direct effects of stress hormones on endocrine organs and indirect effects through behavior changes like poor sleep and altered eating patterns. Stress doesn't affect everyone's hormones identically. Individual vulnerability varies based on genetics, past experiences, coping skills, and social support. This explains why two people facing similar stressors may show very different hormonal and health outcomes. Addressing chronic stress isn't optional for hormonal health. It's fundamental. Yet modern life often normalizes constant stress, treating it as inevitable rather than as a biological challenge requiring attention. The gut microbiome influences hormones. Gut bacteria produce compounds that affect metabolism, inflammation, and even neurotransmitter production. Some bacteria produce substances that mimic hormones or affect hormone metabolism. The gut-brain axis involves bidirectional communication, with gut bacteria influencing brain function and behavior through multiple pathways, including hormonal mechanisms. Antibiotics temporarily disrupt the microbiome and can cause short-term metabolic changes, possibly through effects on hormone-related bacterial functions. Probiotics and prebiotics are marketed for numerous benefits, but evidence for hormonal effects is still emerging. The microbiome is incredibly complex, with hundreds of bacterial species, and we're only beginning to understand which species affect which hormones and how. This is an active research frontier that may eventually lead to microbiome-targeted approaches for hormonal conditions. Hormones affect how we perceive the world. Testosterone influences confidence and risk-taking behavior. Oxytocin affects trust and social perception. Cortisol influences memory formation, particularly for emotional events. Estrogen and progesterone affect mood and sensory perception. These aren't just side effects. They're features that helped our ancestors survive. Hormones that made you more cautious during pregnancy, more aggressive when defending territory, or more socially bonded with your group had survival value. In modern contexts, these same hormonal influences can sometimes work against us. The testosterone-driven risk-taking that might have helped in ancestral hunting now contributes to reckless driving. The cortisol response that enhanced memory of threats now contributes to anxiety disorders. Understanding how hormones shape perception helps explain behaviors that might otherwise seem irrational. Placebo effects involve hormonal mechanisms. When people expect pain relief, their brains release endorphins, creating actual pain reduction. When people expect performance enhancement, hormonal changes can occur that genuinely improve performance. The mind-body connection isn't mystical. It operates through concrete mechanisms, including hormonal pathways. This doesn't mean placebo effects are just imagination. They're real biological responses triggered by expectations. Medical treatments work partly through specific effects and partly through placebo mechanisms, which is why the ritual and context of treatment matter. A doctor's bedside manner isn't just about comfort, it affects treatment outcomes through hormonal and other physiological pathways. Understanding this complexity helps explain why healing involves more than just targeting disease mechanisms. The concept of hormesis suggests that mild stressors can improve health. Exercise is hormetic, creating temporary stress that triggers beneficial adaptations. Fasting is hormetix. Cold exposure is hormetix. The key is that the stressor must be temporary and moderate. Chronic or excessive stress becomes harmful rather than beneficial. The hormonal response to acute stress differs from chronic stress. Acute stress triggers a coordinated response that resolves once the stressor passes. Chronic stress creates sustained activation that becomes maladaptive. Many modern health practices involve deliberately applying controlled stressors to trigger hormonal adaptations. This works best when recovery is adequate and the stressor is genuinely temporary. The same principle applies to hormones themselves. Cycling, rather than constant elevation, may be more beneficial, as seen with testosterone's natural daily rhythm or seasonal patterns in some hormones. Seasonal changes affect hormones even in modern climate-controlled environments. Vitamin D levels decline in winter, affecting multiple hormonal systems. Melatonin patterns shift with changing day length. Some people show seasonal mood changes linked to hormonal alterations. Historically, humans showed more dramatic seasonal variation, including seasonal changes in reproduction, metabolism, and behavior. Modern life dampens, but doesn't eliminate these patterns. Seasonal eating, aligned with historical food availability, may have health benefits through effects on metabolic hormones, though evidence is limited. The persistence of seasonal hormonal patterns despite modern lifestyle suggests deep evolutionary roots for these rhythms. Whether we should work with or against seasonal variation remains unclear, but acknowledging these patterns exists helps explain some individual variation in hormone levels and responses. Hormonal contraception represents massive hormonal intervention. Birth control pills, patches, and rings deliver synthetic hormones that override natural cycles. For many women, this is beneficial, providing reliable contraception and managing difficult menstrual symptoms. But it's worth acknowledging this represents a significant alteration of the endocrine system. Different contraceptive formulations have different effects, and individual responses vary widely. Some women experience mood changes, altered libido, or metabolic effects. Others notice no negative effects and appreciate the benefits. The decision to use hormonal contraception involves weighing personal priorities, medical factors, and individual response. There's no universal right answer, but it should be an informed choice based on understanding both benefits and potential effects. The fact that hormonal contraception works demonstrates how powerfully exogenous hormones can override natural hormonal rhythms. Hormone testing has limitations. Single measurements can be misleading because hormones fluctuate. Timing matters enormously. A testosterone measurement at 8 a.m. differs substantially from one at 8 p.m. The menstrual cycle phase affects interpretation of sex hormone levels. Reference ranges are broad and may not reflect optimal levels for individuals. Free hormone levels sometimes matter more than total levels, but not all tests measure both. Some hormones are difficult to measure accurately, requiring special collection or handling procedures. Saliva, blood, and urine tests measure different things and aren't directly comparable. Despite these limitations, hormone testing remains valuable when properly interpreted. The key is understanding what the numbers mean and don't mean. A single hormone level rarely tells the whole story. Pattern, trends, and clinical context matter as much as absolute values. The future of endocrinology involves personalized approaches. Genetic testing may help predict individual hormone responses and disease risks. Continuous monitoring devices, similar to continuous glucose monitors, might track other hormones in real time. Artificial intelligence could analyze complex patterns across multiple hormones to identify subtle dysfunction earlier. Targeted therapies might replace current blunt approaches, such as using selective receptor modulators instead of general hormone replacement. Understanding individual variation in receptors, metabolism, and feedback sensitivity could allow truly personalized hormone optimization. These approaches remain largely future prospects, but the direction is clear. The one-size-fits-all approach to hormonal health is giving way to recognition that individual biology matters enormously. Your optimal hormone levels might differ from the next person's, and future medicine may finally account for that. Stress hormones get blamed for everything, but the story is more complicated. Yes, chronic cortisol elevation causes problems, but acute stress responses are protective, even essential. The issue isn't stress hormones themselves, but their chronic activation without resolution. Your body is designed to spike cortisol when threatened, then return to baseline. Modern life creates constant low-grade activation instead of sharp peaks and valleys. This pattern causes different problems than true acute stress. Understanding this distinction matters because the solution isn't eliminating stress responses, but managing their duration and intensity. Some stress is hormetic, making you stronger through adaptation. Zero stress is not the goal. Appropriate stress followed by recovery is what builds resilience, both physically and hormonally. Cortisol follows a daily rhythm that's often ignored. Levels should be highest in the morning, helping you wake and mobilize energy. They decline throughout the day, reaching their lowest point at night to permit sleep. This pattern is called the diurnal cortisol curve, and its disruption predicts various health problems better than average cortisol levels. You can have normal average cortisol but a flattened curve, meaning insufficient morning rise and elevated evening levels. This pattern is common in chronic stress, depression, and metabolic syndrome. Light exposure helps maintain the curve, with morning light supporting the cortisol awakening response and evening light suppression allowing the decline. Shift workers often show disrupted curves, contributing to their elevated disease risk. The curve matters more than the level, yet it's rarely measured clinically because it requires multiple samples throughout the day. When people say they're tired but wired, they're often describing a flattened cortisol curve. Exercise is hormonal medicine, but dose matters enormously. Moderate exercise generally improves hormonal health across multiple systems. It enhances insulin sensitivity, supports testosterone production, helps regulate cortisol rhythms, and promotes growth hormone release. But excessive exercise without adequate recovery has opposite effects. Overtraining suppresses reproductive hormones, elevates cortisol chronically, and can impair thyroid function. The sweet spot varies individually based on genetics, training history, nutrition, sleep, and other stressors. What constitutes healthy exercise for one person might be overtraining for another. Women are particularly susceptible to hormonal disruption from excessive exercise, especially when combined with undereating. The combination can suppress the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, causing menstrual irregularities and bone loss. Men can experience similar effects with severe overtraining, including testosterone suppression. The key is viewing exercise as a hormonal intervention, not just calorie expenditure. More is not always better. The right amount provides hormetic stress that triggers adaptation. Too much creates chronic stress that depletes reserves. Fasting affects hormones in complex ways. Short-term fasting typically raises growth hormone and can improve insulin sensitivity. But extended fasting or chronic calorie restriction suppresses reproductive hormones and thyroid function. The body interprets energy scarcity as a reason to down-regulate reproduction and metabolism. This makes evolutionary sense, conserving resources during famine, but it means aggressive fasting or cutting can backfire hormonally. Women generally show earlier hormonal suppression from fasting than men, though individual variation exists. Time-restricted eating with adequate calories may provide benefits without triggering conservation responses. But true extended fasting or severe restriction almost always affects hormones eventually. Some people tolerate fasting well initially, but develop problems over months. Others show rapid hormonal response to even modest restriction. Monitoring how you feel matters more than following a protocol. If energy crashes, sleep deteriorates, or libido disappears, hormones are likely affected regardless of what the diet promises. Alcohol disrupts hormones more than most people realize. Even moderate drinking affects testosterone, estrogen metabolism, cortisol, and growth hormone. Alcohol impairs the liver's ability to clear hormones, leading to accumulation. It directly suppresses testosterone production while increasing its conversion to estrogen. It disrupts sleep architecture, affecting growth hormone release and cortisol rhythms. The effects are dose-dependent, but there's no clear, safe threshold where hormonal effects disappear entirely. Chronic drinking causes more severe disruption, but even occasional binge drinking creates temporary hormonal chaos. Recovery takes longer than the acute effects last, meaning weekend drinking can affect hormones throughout the week. Individual variation exists, with some people showing greater hormonal sensitivity to alcohol. Genetics affecting alcohol metabolism and hormone receptors both play roles. The cultural normalization of regular drinking makes these effects easy to dismiss, but the endocrine disruption is real and measurable. Endocrine disruptors in the environment deserve attention. Certain chemicals mimic or block hormones, potentially causing effects at very low doses. Bisphenols, phthalates, certain pesticides, and flame retardants show hormonal activity in laboratory studies. Human exposure studies show associations with altered hormone levels and reproductive problems, though causation is harder to prove definitively. The doses involved are often far below levels causing acute toxicity, but chronic low-level exposure during development might have lasting effects. Children and pregnant women may be particularly vulnerable. The precautionary principle suggests minimizing exposure even while research continues. Practical steps include avoiding heating food in plastic, choosing glass or steel water bottles, reducing use of fragranced products, and selecting organic produce for foods with high pesticide residues. These measures won't eliminate exposure since these chemicals are widespread, but they reduce it. Whether current exposure levels cause significant problems in most adults remains debated, but the theoretical concern has biological plausibility. Body composition affects hormones bidirectionally. Fat tissue produces hormones and inflammatory signals that affect other endocrine organs. Excess fat, especially visceral fat around organs, disrupts insulin signaling and increases estrogen production through aromatase activity. This can create a vicious cycle where hormonal disruption promotes further fat gain. But extreme leanness also disrupts hormones, particularly reproductive hormones. The body interprets very low body fat as energy scarcity, downregulating reproduction. Women need a minimum fat percentage for regular cycles, though the exact threshold varies individually. Men can also experience hormonal suppression with extreme leanness, though usually at lower body fat percentages than women. The metabolically healthy weight, RANG, is broader than aesthetic ideals suggest. Optimal hormonal function often occurs at moderate body fat levels that provide energy reserves without metabolic dysfunction. Chasing extremely low body fat for appearance often comes with hormonal trade-offs that affect health, performance, and well-being. Temperature exposure affects hormones in surprising ways. Cold exposure increases norepinephrine acutely and may boost metabolism through thyroid hormone effects and brown fat activation. Some evidence suggests regular cold exposure improves insulin sensitivity. But Extreme cold is a stressor, elevating cortisol. The hormetic benefit comes from brief exposure followed by warming. Heat exposure through sauna use shows different effects. It acutely raises growth hormone and prolactin. Regular sauna use may improve insulin sensitivity and cardiovascular health through various mechanisms, including hormonal changes. Heat shock proteins produced during heat stress have protective effects throughout the body. Both hot and cold exposure represent hormetic stressors that can benefit hormonal health when used appropriately. But excessive or poorly timed exposure can become maladaptive stress. The key, as with exercise, is finding the dose that triggers adaptation without overwhelming recovery capacity. Gut health influences hormones through multiple pathways. The gut microbiome helps metabolize hormones, produces hormone-like signaling molecules, and affects inflammation that influences endocrine function. Disrupted gut health can alter estrogen metabolism, affecting levels of active estrogen throughout the body. The gut-brain axis includes hormonal signaling that affects stress responses and mood. Certain bacteria produce neurotransmitter precursors that influence the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Gut permeability might allow inflammatory molecules into circulation that disrupt hormonal signaling. While the exact mechanisms and clinical significance continue being researched, the connection between gut and hormonal health appears real. Supporting gut health through varied fiber intake, ADF, fermented foods, and avoiding unnecessary antibiotics makes sense for hormonal health, even while mechanistic details are still being worked out. The microbiome represents a modifiable factor affecting hormones that receives less attention than it probably deserves. Social connections affect hormones profoundly. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, is released during positive social interactions, physical touch, and sexual activity. It promotes trust, reduces stress responses, and may have cardiovascular benefits. Chronic loneliness elevates inflammatory markers and stress hormones. Social rejection activates stress systems similarly to physical threats. Strong social bonds are associated with better regulation of cortisol and inflammatory markers. The hormonal effects of social connection are bidirectional, with hormones also influencing social behavior. Testosterone affects dominance behaviors and competition. Oxytocin influences trust and bonding. These systems evolve together, making social connection a biological need with hormonal co-sequences when unmet. Modern isolation and digital communication may not satisfy these systems the same way in-person connection does. The hormonal benefits of strong relationships represent another pathway through which social connection affects health. You can't supplement your way out of loneliness, but you can recognize that social bonds are endocrine interventions. Trauma and early life stress leave hormonal signatures. Childhood adversity is associated with altered stress hormone regulation that persists into adulthood. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis shows different patterns in people with trauma histories, often with enhanced reactivity or disrupted rhythms. These changes likely represent adaptations to threatening environments that become maladaptive in safer contexts. Trauma-focused therapy can sometimes normalize these patterns, suggesting they're not permanently fixed. But the hormonal effects of early stress demonstrate how environment shapes endocrine function during development. This has implications for understanding individual differences in stress responses and mental health. Two people facing the same current stressor may have very different hormonal responses based on developmental history. Recognizing this helps explain why stress management advice doesn't work equally for everyone. Some people's stress systems were calibrated differently based on early experience. Healing may require addressing the trauma, not just managing current stress. Pregnancy represents the most dramatic hormonal transformation most women experience. Progesterone and estrogen increase enormously, eventually reaching levels hundreds of times higher than in non-pregnant states. The placenta becomes a temporary endocrine organ, producing hormones that alter maternal metabolism to support fetal growth. These changes affect every system. Insulin resistance increases, preparing for lactation. Thyroid hormone needs increase substantially. Cortisol rises, but the stress response is dampened. Relaxin loosens ligaments, preparing for birth. After delivery, hormones plummet rapidly, creating the largest hormonal shift humans normally experience. This sudden withdrawal contributes to postpartum mood changes and, in susceptible women, postpartum depression. The hormonal transformation of pregnancy and the postpartum period are so profound they can permanently alter hormonal function. Some women report changed menstrual patterns, metabolism, or stress responses after pregnancy. Pregnancy is a natural experiment in extreme hormonal manipulation, demonstrating how adaptable and yet how sensitive the endocrine system can be. Menopause is not a disease, but a natural transition with hormonal consequences. Estrogen and progesterone production from ovaries declines, eventually ceasing. This transition typically occurs over several years with irregular cycles and fluctuating hormone levels before final cessation. The hormonal changes affect multiple systems. Vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes result from altered hypothalamic temperature regulation. Sleep disruption is common. Bone loss accelerates without estrogen's protective effects. Metabolic changes often include fat redistribution and reduced insulin sensitivity. Mood changes affect some women significantly, but individual variation is enormous. Some women transition with minimal symptoms while others struggle significantly. Hormone replacement therapy can alleviate symptoms, but involves trade-offs between benefits and risks that differ individually. The decision to use HRT should be personalized based on symptoms, risk factors, and preferences. Characterizing menopause as a deficiency disease requiring treatment is oversimplified. It's a natural transition with real effects that may or may not warrant intervention depending on individual circumstances. Modern longevity means women spend decades postmenopausal, making the quality of this transition important. Male aging involves gradual hormonal changes, unlike the acute transition of menopause. Testosterone declines slowly in most men, typically beginning in the 30s and continuing throughout life. But the decline is gradual and variable. Some men maintain high testosterone into old age, while others show more significant decreases. The clinical significance of age-related testosterone decline remains debated. Some decline may be normal aging rather than pathology requiring treatment. But significant symptoms with low levels might warrant intervention. The term andropause misleadingly suggests a male equivalent of menopause, but the patterns differ substantially. Testosterone replacement in aging men can improve symptoms, but carries risks, including cardiovascular concerns and prostate CTS. The decision to supplement should involve careful evaluation of levels, symptoms, and individual risk factors. Many symptoms attributed to low testosterone, such as fatigue and weight gain, have multiple potential causes. Addressing sleep, stress, exercise, and nutrition sometimes improves symptoms without hormonal intervention. Testosterone is not a fountain of youth, but appropriate use in genuinely deficient men can improve quality of life. Puberty timing affects lifelong health in surprising ways. Early puberty, especially in girls, is associated with increased risk for certain cancers, metabolic disease, and mental health issues. Late puberty may protect against some conditions, but carries other risks. The mechanisms aren't fully understood, but likely involve prolonged exposure to sex hormones and effects on growth and development. Environmental factors affecting puberty timing include nutrition, body composition, endocrine disruptors, and possibly stress. Average puberty age has declined in recent decades, particularly for girls, raising concerns about contributing factors. While individual puberty timing can't be controlled after the fact, understanding these associations helps explain some adult health patterns. It also motivates efforts to identify and reduce factors causing earlier puberty in populations. The timing of this developmental transition has effects that echo throughout life, demonstrating how hormones during critical windows shape long-term biology. The body's response to stress reveals hormonal sophistication that evolved for survival, but often misfires in modern contexts. When threat appears, the hypothalamus activates the HPA axis within milliseconds. Corticotropin-releasing hormone triggers ACTH release from the pituitary, which signals adrenal glands to produce cortisol. This cascade mobilizes energy, sharpens attention, and suppresses non-essential functions. In acute stress, this system is protective. Cortisol raises blood glucose, enhances memory formation for the threatening event, and modulates immune responses. The problem emerges with chronic activation. When stress becomes constant, cortisol remains elevated, leading to consequences the system wasn't designed to handle. Prolonged high cortisol impairs memory formation, particularly in the hippocampus where stress hormone receptors are dense. It promotes abdominal fat deposition, insulin resistance, and can contribute to hypertension. Immune function becomes dysregulated. Sleep suffers. The system designed for brief emergencies becomes destructive when running continuously. Individual stress reactivity varies enormously based on genetics, early life experience, and current circumstances. Some people show large cortisol responses to minor stressors, while others remain relatively stable through significant challenges. This variation affects health outcomes. Chronically high reactors face greater risk for stress-related diseases. But reactivity isn't entirely fixed. Interventions including meditation, exercise, and therapy can modify stress responses. The key insight is that psychological stress translates into physical consequences through hormonal pathways. The mind-body connection isn't metaphorical. It's endocrine. Your thoughts and perceptions directly influence cortisol production, which affects virtually every tissue. Understanding this mechanism doesn't eliminate stress, but can motivate protective behaviors. Managing stress isn't just about feeling better. It's about protecting your hormonal and physical health from a system pushed beyond its evolutionary design parameters. Adrenaline creates the immediate rush everyone recognizes, but cortisol does the sustained work. When you startle, adrenaline acts within seconds, increasing heart rate and blood pressure, dilating airways, and shifting blood flow to muscles. This creates the physical sensations of fear or excitement, but adrenaline clears quickly, within minutes. Cortisol rises more slowly and persists longer, maintaining readiness. It ensures glucose availability, modulates inflammation, and keeps you alert. Together, these hormones create a two-phase response, immediate and sustained. In short-term stress, this coordination works beautifully. The problem is that psychological stressors, unlike physical threats, don't resolve quickly. Worrying about finances or relationships can keep cortisol elevated for hours or days. The system wasn't built for that. Chronic elevation leads to the cascade of problems already mentioned, but there's another layer. The HPA axis can become dysregulated itself. In some people, chronic stress leads to blunted cortisol responses, a state sometimes seen in burnout or PTSD. The system becomes exhausted, unable to mount appropriate responses. In others, responses become exaggerated, with hair trigger activation. Both patterns predict health problems, just different ones. This illustrates a crucial principle. Hormonal systems require appropriate activation and appropriate shutoff. When either fails, dysfunction follows. Modern interventions sometimes focus on reducing stress reactivity, but normal stress responses aren't the enemy. They're protective when working correctly. The issue is chronic activation or failed regulation. Restoring normal patterns matters more than simply suppressing responses. Techniques that help regulate rather than just reduce stress responses may prove most effective. The goal isn't to eliminate cortisol. It's to restore the system's natural rhythm and responsiveness. Oxytocin gained fame as the bonding hormone, but its functions extend far beyond creating warm feelings. It's produced in the hypothalamus and released from the posterior pituitary. In childbirth, oxytocin triggers uterine contractions. During breastfeeding, it causes milk letdown. These mechanical functions are critical, but tell only part of the story. Oxytocin also modulates social behavior, trust, and stress responses. It's released during positive social interactions, physical touch, and sexual activity. This release reinforces social bonds and reduces anxiety. The system creates a feedback loop where social connection triggers oxytocin, which makes further connection feel rewarding. This biology underlies human social nature. We're not social because of culture alone. We're wired for connection through hormonal mechanisms. But oxytocin's effects aren't universally positive. Research shows it can increase in-group favoritism while enhancing negative feelings toward outsiders. It promotes bonding within groups, but can amplify tribalism between groups. Context matters enormously. Oxytocin doesn't create unconditional love. It enhances whatever social tendencies already exist. In trusting contexts, it increases trust. In suspicious contexts, it can increase wariness. This context dependency reveals sophistication often missing from popular accounts. Oxytocin is not a simple happiness molecule. It's a social regulatory system that evolved to navigate complex group dynamics. Understanding this prevents oversimplified interventions. Nasal oxytocin has been studied for various conditions, including autism and social anxiety, with mixed results. The complexity of the system means simple supplementation often fails to produce expected benefits. Oxytocin works within intricate neural and social contexts that can't be easily replicated with a spray. The lesson applies broadly. Individual hormones don't create specific emotions or behaviors. They modulate complex systems in context-dependent ways. Expecting single hormones to solve behavioral or emotional problems misunderstands how these systems actually function. Vasopressin works alongside oxytocin in social and stress regulation, but with distinct effects. Also produced in the hypothalamus and released from the posterior pituitary, vasopressin's primary classical role involves water balance. It's also called antidiuretic hormone because it reduces urine production, helping maintain blood volume and pressure. When dehydrated, vasopressin levels rise, signaling kidneys to conserve water. This basic function is life-sustaining, but vasopressin also affects behavior. In animals, it influences pair bonding, particularly in males, and modulates aggression and territorial behavior. The parallels in humans are less clear, but suggestive. Vasopressin may influence male-typical social behaviors, including protectiveness and responses to social challenges. Some research links it to aggression in competitive contexts. The hormone seems to work in opposition to and in concert with oxytocin, creating a balanced system for navigating social environments. High vasopressin with low oxytocin promote vigilance and defensive aggression. High oxytocin with lower vasopressin might promote affiliation and trust. The ratio and context matter more than absolute levels. This interplay shows how hormonal systems create behavioral flexibility. You're not locked into one social style. Different situations trigger different hormonal profiles, which bias you toward appropriate responses. When a stranger approaches your child, vasopressin-mediated vigilance serves you well. When greeting a friend, oxytocin-mediated openness serves better. The system evolved to handle both situations. Problems arise when the system becomes miscalibrated, responding to neutral situations as threats or failing to respond to actual dangers. Trauma can shift these set points, making the world feel persistently threatening. Therapy and other interventions may work partly by recalibrating these hormonal response patterns, helping the system match responses to actual context rather than historical threats. Hunger and satiety involve a complex hormonal conversation between gut, fat tissue, and brain. Ghrelin, produced primarily in the stomach, rises before meals and triggers hunger. It signals energy deficit and promotes food-seeking behavior. After eating, ghrelin drops, reducing the drive to eat. Leptin, produced by fat cells, signals energy abundance. Higher leptin tells the brain that energy stores are sufficient, reducing appetite and increasing energy expenditure. This system should create stable body weight regulation. When energy stores drop, leptin decreases, hunger increases, and metabolism slows to conserve energy. When stores rise, leptin increases, appetite decreases, and metabolism rises to burn excess. In theory, this creates a negative feedback loop, maintaining stable weight. In practice, the system often fails in modern environments. Obesity is associated with leptin resistance, where high leptin levels fail to suppress appetite effectively. The brain stops responding appropriately to the signal. This creates a vicious cycle where the person remains hungry despite ample energy stores. The mechanisms of leptin resistance aren't fully understood, but involve inflammation, genetics, and possibly the specific composition of excess weight. Insulin also plays a key role in appetite regulation. Beyond its glucose management function, insulin acts in the brain to reduce food intake. Insulin resistance therefore affects both glucose handling and appetite control, linking metabolic dysfunction with eating behavior. Multiple other hormones contribute, including peptide YY, cholecystokinin, and GLP-1, all influencing satiety. The system is redundant and complex, reflecting the evolutionary importance of energy balance. Modern food environments overwhelm these systems. Highly palatable, energy-dense foods trigger reward pathways that can override satiety signals. Constant food availability removes the natural fasting periods that historically allowed hormone levels to reset. The result is a population struggling with a regulatory system designed for scarcity, operating in abundance. Understanding these mechanisms doesn't provide easy solutions, but explains why willpower alone often fails. You're fighting biology, not just habits. Melatonin regulates circadian rhythms and sleep-wake cycles through mechanisms still being fully understood. Produced primarily by the pineal gland, melatonin rises in the evening as darkness falls and drops in the morning with light exposure. This pattern entrains the body's internal clock to the day-night cycle. Light exposure, particularly blue wavelengths, suppresses melatonin production. This is why evening screen time can disrupt sleep. The light signals to your brain that it's still daytime, delaying melatonin rise and shifting your sleep phase later. Over time, this creates a mismatch between your internal clock and your schedule. Melatonin doesn't cause sleep directly like a sedative. Instead, it opens a window where sleep becomes possible by reducing arousal and signaling that it's nighttime. Actual sleep onset requires other factors including sufficient sleep pressure and absence of alerting stimuli. Supplemental melatonin can help with circadian misalignment such as jet lag or shift work, but it's timing sensitive. Taking it at the wrong time can actually worsen circadian disruption. The effective dose is also much lower than commonly sold supplements. Physiological doses are measured in micrograms, not the milligrams found in most products. Higher doses don't necessarily work better and may cause next-day grogginess. Melatonin also has roles beyond sleep, including antioxidant functions and immune modulation. Some research suggests it affects seasonal reproduction in animals, though human seasonal effects are less clear. The hormone demonstrates how environmental cues, particularly light, directly regulate internal biology. Modern light exposure patterns with insufficient daytime brightness and excessive evening light can disrupt this system. Optimizing light exposure, getting bright light early and minimizing it late supports natural melatonin rhythms. This often improves sleep more effectively than supplementation. The system evolved to respond to natural light-dark cycles. Recreating those patterns as much as possible, he, LPS, maintain synchronization. Vitamin D functions more like a hormone than a vitamin, affecting numerous physiological processes beyond bone health. It's produced in skin from cholesterol when exposed to UVB radiation from sunlight, then undergoes modifications in liver and kidney to become active. The active form, calcitriol, acts on vitamin D receptors found in most tissues. Its most recognized role involves calcium absorption and bone mineralization. Deficiency causes rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults, conditions involving soft, weak bones. But vitamin D receptors exist throughout the body, suggesting broader functions. Research has linked vitamin D status to immune function, cardiovascular health, cancer risk, mood, and more. The challenge is distinguishing causation from correlation. Low vitamin D might cause these problems, or it might simply be a marker of poor health or limited sun exposure. Many large supplementation trials have disappointed, failing to show benefits for conditions associated with low levels. This suggests the relationship is complex. Perhaps vitamin D is a marker of outdoor time and overall health rather than a direct cause. Or perhaps supplementation can't replicate the complex effects of sun exposure, which produces vitamin D along with other photoproducts. The immune effects are particularly interesting. Vitamin D appears to modulate both innate and adaptive immunity, generally promoting balanced responses rather than simple activation or suppression. Seasonal variation in vitamin D levels might partly explain why respiratory infections are more common in winter. But again, supplementation studies show mixed results. The modern indoor lifestyle with minimal sun exposure has created widespread insufficiency. Whether this requires universal supplementation or simply more time outdoors remains debated. Testing levels and supplementing when clearly deficient makes sense. But mega doses for everyone lack strong S, abhorrent. The story of vitamin D shows how even well-studied hormones can resist simple narratives. Biology is rarely as straightforward as we'd like. Erythropoietin stimulates red blood cell production in response to oxygen availability, demonstrating how hormones maintain homeostasis. Produced primarily by kidneys, EPO rises when oxygen delivery to tissues is inadequate. This triggers increased red blood cell production in bone marrow, raising oxygen carrying capacity. At high altitude, lower oxygen pressure stimulates EPO production, gradually increasing red blood cells over weeks. This is why altitude training can benefit athletes. The additional red cells persist after returning to sea level, improving oxygen delivery during competition. Of course, this same mechanism led to EPO abuse in endurance sports, artificially boosting red cell counts beyond natural levels. The practice is dangerous because excessive red cell production thickens blood, increasing clot risk and cardiac strain. Several athletes have died from EPO abuse. Medical uses of EPO are important for treating anemia, particularly in kidney disease, where EPO production is impaired. Supplementation can restore normal red cell counts and alleviate fatigue. The discovery and development of recombinant EPO was a major medical advance, but it also illustrates how hormones designed for specific contexts can be misused. EPO evolved to handle altitude and blood loss, not to create supraphysiological oxygen carrying capacity. Pushing the system beyond its design parameters creates risks the body isn't equipped to handle. This pattern repeats with many hormones. They work beautifully within normal ranges, but cause problems when artificially elevated. The EPO system also shows remarkable sensitivity. Even small changes in oxygen availability trigger appropriate responses. This precision is typical of endocrine systems. They continuously monitor conditions and make fine adjustments to maintain balance. When functioning properly, you never notice this regulation. It's only when systems fail or are artificially manipulated that the sophistication becomes apparent. Atrial natriuretic peptide regulates blood volume and pressure through effects on kidneys and blood vessels. Produced by heart muscle cells when stretched by increased blood volume, ANP triggers sodium and water excretion, reducing blood volume and pressure. It's a beautiful negative feedback system. High blood volume stretches the heart, which releases ANP, which reduces blood volume, relieving the stretch. This prevents fluid overload and helps maintain stable blood pressure. The discovery of ANP was surprising because the heart was not previously known to have endocrine function. It revealed that organs communicate through hormones in ways we're still uncovering. ANP works in opposition to the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, which increases blood volume and pressure. Together, these systems create bidirectional control, able to adjust pressure both up and down as needed. This dual control allows precise regulation. Many physiological systems use similar push-pull arrangements with opposing hormones, providing fine control. The thyroid hormones and PTH for calcium, insulin, and glucagon for glucose, and various others, follow this pattern. It's more flexible than simple on-off switches. ANP also affects the brain, suppressing thirst and salt appetite. This behavioral effect complements the kidney effects, reducing both intake and increasing output of salt and water. The integration of hormonal, neural, and behavioral effects demonstrates how complex these regulatory systems are. A change in blood volume triggers hormonal responses, which affect kidney function and behavior, all working toward the same goal. When systems like this fail, as in heart failure, fluid regulation breaks down. Understanding the hormonal mechanisms has led to therapeutic strategies targeting these pathways. Human growth hormone declines with age, leading some to promote it as an anti-aging therapy. But the reality is more complicated. HGH is essential during growth, but after growth plates close, its role shifts to maintenance. It continues affecting metabolism, body composition, and tissue repair, but at lower levels than during adolescence. The age-related decline is natural and may even be protective. Some research suggests that lower GH levels in later life are associated with longevity. Artificially maintaining youthful levels might actually be counterproductive. Despite this, HGH has been marketed as an anti-aging miracle. Some studies show it increases lean mass and reduces fat mass in older adults, which sounds beneficial. But these changes don't necessarily translate to improved funk, tie-in, or health. Some trials show increased side effects, including joint pain, fluid retention, and insulin resistance. The cost is also extreme, and most benefits disappear when treatment stops. The appeal is understandable. People want to reverse aging, and a hormone that declines with age seems like an obvious target. But evolution doesn't maintain high HGH throughout life accidentally. The decline likely serves a purpose, possibly reducing cancer risk or conserving resources. Trying to override this natural pattern may create more problems than it solves. This doesn't mean HGH has no legitimate uses. In genuine deficiency states, replacement can improve quality of life. But recreational use in normally aging adults lacks good evidence and carries real risks. The broader lesson applies to many hormones. Natural age-related changes aren't always pathological. Sometimes they're adaptive. Intervention should address actual deficiencies causing problems, not simply restore youthful levels for their own sake. Hormones affect virtually every aspect of physiology, but their effects are often misunderstood in popular culture. They're frequently portrayed as simple cause and effect agents. Take this hormone, feel this way. The reality is that hormones work within complex systems involving feedback loops, receptor sensitivity, competing signals, and context-dependent effects. A hormone's effect depends on what receptors are present, what other hormones are active, and what the tissue's current state is. This complexity means simple interventions often fail. Giving testosterone doesn't automatically increase muscle mass. It depends on exercise, nutrition, genetics, and baseline levels. Giving oxytocin doesn't automatically create bonding. It depends on social context and individual psychology. Yet the reductionist narrative persists because it's simpler and more marketable. Understanding hormones properly requires accepting this complexity. They're not magic bullets. They're regulatory signals in sophisticated systems. When those systems are functioning well, subtle adjustments can make meaningful differences. When systems are dysregulated, addressing root causes matters more than tweaking individual hormones. The endocrine system evolved over hundreds of millions of years to maintain homeostasis in changing environments. It's remarkably resilient and self-correcting when given appropriate inputs. Sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress management, and social connection influence hormonal health more than most interventions. These fundamentals sound boring compared to exotic supplements or hormone optimization protocols, but they work because they support the entire system rather than forcing individual components. Respecting the system's complexity and working with it rather than against it usually produces better outcomes than trying to hack individual hormones. The most important insight about hormones might be this: they're not separate from the rest of your biology. They're how your biology communicates with itself. Supporting overall health supports hormonal health and vice versa. There's no shortcut around that fundamental connection. The immune system and hormones communicate constantly, forming what scientists call the neuroendocrine immune network. This bidirectional relationship means hormones influence immune function and immune signals influence hormone production. During illness, this interaction becomes especially apparent. Inflammatory cytokines, chemical messengers released by immune cells, signal the brain to alter hormone secretion. This triggers what's called sickness behavior: fatigue, reduced appetite, social withdrawal, and altered sleep patterns. These aren't just side effects of being ill. They're coordinated responses orchestrated through hormonal changes. Cortisol rises during infection, which seems counterintuitive, since cortisol suppresses some immune responses. But this suppression prevents the immune system from overshooting and causing excessive inflammation. It's a regulatory break, not immune suppression in a negative sense. Without adequate cortisol, inflammatory responses can spiral out of control. This explains why people with adrenal insufficiency are vulnerable during infections. The thyroid also adjusts during illness. T3 levels often drop in a pattern called non-thyroidal illness syndrome. The body down-regulates metabolism to conserve energy for fighting infection. Once the acute threat passes, thyroid function normalizes. Treating this temporary suppression with thyroid hormone doesn't improve outcomes and may be harmful. Sex hormones interact with immunity too. Estrogen generally enhances certain immune responses, which helps explain why autoimmune diseases are more common in women. Testosterone tends to be immunosuppressive, which may contribute to men's increased vulnerability to some infections. These patterns reflect evolutionary trade-offs. Stronger immune responses help fight pathogens, but increase autoimmune risk. Weaker responses reduce that risk, but increase infection vulnerability. Neither is universally better. They represent different strategies shaped by different reproductive pressures. Women's immune systems needed to handle the challenges of pregnancy when the fetus is technically foreign tissue. Men's systems prioritized other survival demands. Understanding these connections matters for practical reasons. Chronic inflammation, even low-grade, disrupts hormonal balance. Inflammatory signals interfere with hormone signaling pathways. This is why chronic diseases affecting inflammation, like obesity or autoimmune conditions, often involve hormonal dysfunction. It's not coincidental. The systems are intertwined. Conversely, hormonal imbalances affect immune function. Poorly controlled diabetes increases infection risk, partly through hormonal mechanisms. Low testosterone in men is associated with increased inflammatory markers. These aren't separate problems occurring simultaneously. They're manifestations of interconnected system dysfunction. Addressing one often improves the other. Reducing chronic inflammation can restore hormonal balance. Optimizing hormonal health can modulate inflammation. This is another example of why reductionist approaches fail. Treating hormones in isolation from immune function, or vice versa, misses the bigger picture. Sleep provides a clear example of this integration. During deep sleep, growth hormone pulses while cortisol reaches its daily low. This hormonal environment promotes tissue repair and immune function. Immune cells conduct maintenance activities and consolidate immunological memory. Disrupting sleep disrupts this process. Even a few nights of poor sleep measurably suppresses immune function and alters hormone rhythms. Chronic sleep deprivation creates a state of mild chronic inflammation and hormonal dysregulation. This isn't abstract physiology. It manifests as increased susceptibility to infections, slower wound healing, and metabolic problems. The fix isn't a supplement or hormone. It's addressing the fundamental behavior disrupting the system. Stress provides another example. Chronic stress dysregulates both immune function and hormonal balance through overlapping mechanisms. The HPA axis activation that characterizes chronic stress suppresses some immune responses while paradoxically increasing inflammatory markers. This creates a dysfunctional state where the immune system becomes both underactive in some ways and overactive in others. The hormonal profile of chronic stress, elevated cortisol with disrupted circadian rhythm, directly impairs immune cell function. Simultaneously, stress-induced inflammation interferes with hormone signaling. The result is a self-reinforcing cycle where stress worsens hormonal and immune function, which increases stress vulnerability. Breaking this cycle requires addressing stress itself, not just treating its downstream effects. Nutrition influences this network profoundly. Micronutrient deficiencies impair both immune function and hormone production. Vitamin D, technically a hormone itself, modulates immune responses and influences other hormones. Zinc is critical for both thyroid function and immune cell activity. Inadequate protein intake limits hormone synthesis and immune cell production. These connections explain why malnutrition causes both immunodeficiency and hormonal problems. The systems depend on the same building blocks. Providing adequate nutrition supports both simultaneously. Excessive caloric intake, particularly from processed foods, creates the opposite problem. It drives chronic inflammation and hormonal resistance. This is a key mechanism linking obesity to numerous health problems. The inflammation isn't just a side effect. It's central to how excess adiposity disrupts physiology. Exercise benefits both systems through complementary mechanisms. Acute exercise temporarily activates the immune system and creates beneficial hormonal responses. Regular training adapts both systems, improving their resilience and coordination. Sedentary lifestyle does the opposite. It weakens immune surveillance and disrupts hormonal rhythms. The body evolved expecting regular movement. Without it, regulatory systems drift toward dysfunction. Social connection affects this network too, primarily through stress pathways. Chronic loneliness and social isolation create inflammatory and hormonal profiles similar to chronic stress. Positive social interactions have measurable anti-inflammatory effects and support healthy hormone pattern, NS. This isn't mystical, it's biology. The brain interprets social environment as survival-relevant information and adjusts physiological settings accordingly. Understanding these connections transforms how we think about health interventions. Treating isolated symptoms while ignoring systemic context rarely produces lasting results. A person with fatigue, frequent infections, and hormonal imbalance might receive separate treatments for each problem. But if chronic stress, poor sleep, and inadequate nutrition underlie all three, addressing those fundamentals will accomplish more than targeting individual symptoms. This systems perspective also explains why lifestyle interventions, while less dramatic than pharmaceutical ones, often produce broader benefits. Exercise doesn't just build muscle. It improves insulin sensitivity, reduces inflammation, optimizes hormone rhythms, enhances immune function, and supports mental health. Sleep doesn't just prevent tiredness. It regulates metabolism, consolidates memory, modulates inflammation, supports immune surveillance, and maintains hormonal balance. These interventions work because they support interconnected systems rather than manipulating isolated variables. The challenge is that this approach requires patience and consistency. It's easier to take a pill than to restructure lifestyle. But pills that override system function without addressing underlying causes often create new problems. They may suppress symptoms while the actual dysfunction continues or worsens. This isn't an argument against medication. Sometimes pharmaceutical intervention is necessary and life-saving, but it works best when combined with systemic support rather than used as a substitute for it. The goal should be restoring healthy system function, not just normalizing individual markers. The neuroendocrine immune network also helps explain individual variation in health trajectories. Two people with similar genetics and environments may age very differently. Part of this reflects how their regulatory systems adapted over time. Someone who maintained healthy sleep, managed stress effectively, stayed physically active, and maintained social connections accumulated years of beneficial system optimization. Someone who didn't faces compounding dysregulation. These differences become increasingly visible with age. Early in life, systems are resilient enough to function reasonably well despite suboptimal inputs. But decades of poor sleep, chronic stress, sedentary behavior, and social isolation gradually degrade system function. By middle age, the cumulative effects become apparent. This is often misinterpreted as sudden aging or bad luck. Actually, it's the manifestation of years of gradual system degradation. The encouraging implication is that trajectory can change. Systems retain plasticity throughout life. Improving sleep, reducing chronic stress, increasing activity, and strengthening social ties can restore function even after years of neglect. The changes may take months to fully manifest, but they're possible. This is fundamentally different from the damage accumulation model of aging, where decline is inevitable and irreversible. While some age-related changes are indeed irreversible, many aspects of hormonal and immune function remain modifiable. The system hasn't broken. It's adapted to chronic suboptimal conditions. Change the conditions, and it adapts again. This perspective shifts focus from trying to reverse aging to supporting healthy system function at any age. A 70-year-old can't have the hormone profile of a 20-year-old, nor should they. But they can have healthy hormone function for a 70-year-old, which looks different but supports well-being effectively. The same applies to immune function. Age-related changes in immunity, called immunosenescence, are real. But much of what's attributed to aging is actually the result of decades of chronic inflammation and poor system support. Studies of healthy, active older adults show they maintain much better immune function than sedentary, stressed peers of the same age. Their biological age, measured by system function, differs significantly from chronological age. This suggests the decline commonly seen with aging isn't entirely inevitable. It's partly the compounding effect of lifestyle factors that become increasingly impactful over decades. Addressing those factors at any age improves outcomes. Environmental factors play a role too. Endocrine disrupting chemicals found in plastics, pesticides, and personal care products interfere with hormone signaling. Chronic low-level exposure may contribute to hormonal dysfunction, especially when combined with other stressors. Similarly, environmental factors affecting immune function, from air pollution to chronic infections, interact with hormonal systems. These exposures are difficult to completely avoid in modern life, but awareness allows for risk reduction. Choosing products without endocrine disruptors, improving indoor air quality, and reducing exposure to environmental toxins supports system function. The effects are subtle and cumulative rather than dramatic and immediate, but they matter over time. The gut microbiome represents another critical interface. Gut bacteria produce compounds that influence both immune function and hormone metabolism. They help regulate inflammation, produce neurotransmitters, and metabolize hormones. Disruption of the microbiome through antibiotics, poor diet, or chronic stress affects both hormonal and immune health. This is an active research area, and many specifics remain unclear. But the general principle is established. The microbiome is part of the regulatory network, not separate from it. Supporting gut health through diverse fiber intake, fermented foods, and avoiding unnecessary antibiotics benefits the broader system. Circadian rhythms tie everything together. Nearly all hormones follow daily patterns, and immune function varies throughout the day. These rhythms are coordinated by the central circadian clock in the brain, but influenced by peripheral clocks in organs and tissues. Disrupting circadian rhythms through shift work, irregular sleep, late-night eating, or constant artificial light exposure desynchronizes these clocks. The result is system-wide dysfunction, affecting hormones, immunity, metabolism, and more. Respecting circadian biology by maintaining consistent sleep-wake times, eating during daylight hours, and limiting artificial light at night supports system coordination. It's not about perfection. It's about consistent patterns that allow the body to maintain its rhythms. The modern environment often works against these rhythms. Our ancestors lived with regular light-dark cycles, predictable activity patterns, and consistent social schedules. Modern life offers flexibility and convenience, but at the cost of biological regularity. We can't and shouldn't return to pre-modern lifestyles, but we can recognize the biological cost of disruption and make intentional choices to minimize it. This might mean prioritizing consistent sleep even when inconvenient, eating meals at regular times, get morning sunlight exposure, and creating evening routines that support natural wind down. These seem like small behavioral choices, but they have system-wide effects because they support fundamental regulatory processes. The cumulative impact of these choices, sustained over years, significantly influences health trajectory. Mental health connects to this network through multiple pathways. Depression is associated with specific hormonal and inflammatory profiles. Anxiety disorders involve dysregulated stress hormones. These aren't just correlations. The relationships are bidirectional and mechanistic. Hormonal and immune dysfunction can contribute to mental health problems. Mental health problems create hormonal and immune changes. Chronic stress exemplifies this. It creates the hormonal and inflammatory profile associated with depression. Simultaneously, depression alters stress system regulation, creating a cycle. This is why effective treatment often requires addressing multiple levels. Therapy helps change thought patterns and behavior. Medication may help restore neurotransmitter balance, but lifestyle interventions supporting overall system health, sleep, exercise, nutrition, and social connection often prove critical for sustained improvement. Treating mental health as purely psychological or purely biochemical misses how thoroughly it's integrated with broader physiology. The brain is an organ influenced by the same factors affecting the rest of the body. It's not separate or special in that regard. This integration means mental health and physical health aren't distinct categories. They're different manifestations of overall system function. Poor mental health predicts physical disease. Chronic physical disease increases mental health risk. Interventions supporting system health benefit both. The practical implication is that well-being requires attending to the whole system. You can't optimize one aspect while neglecting others and expect sustained success. A person focused solely on physical fitness while ignoring sleep, stress, and relationships will eventually face problems. Someone addressing mental health while neglecting physical health faces limitations too. The system is integrated. Supporting it means attending to multiple domains simultaneously, recognizing they're interconnected rather than separate. This perspective shifts how we approach health decisions. Rather than asking, is this good or bad? The question becomes, how does this affect system function? A food isn't just calories or nutrients. It's information influencing hormones, immune responses, and microbial populations. Exercise isn't just movement. It's a signal creating adaptive stress that strengthens multiple systems. Sleep isn't downtime. It's active restoration, coordinating everything from hormone secretion to cellular repair. Each choice either supports or undermines system function. The effects aren't immediate or obvious, which makes them easy to dismiss, but they accumulate. A single night of poor sleep barely registers. Chronic sleep deprivation creates measurable hormonal, immune, and metabolic dysfunction. One inflammatory meal doesn't matter. Years of inflammatory diet patterns alter baseline inflammation, affecting disease risk across multiple organ systems. The challenge is that modern environments often default toward system disruption. Ultra-processed foods are convenient and engineered for palatability. Artificial light extends productivity hours. Digital devices keep us connected but disrupt sleep. Social structures prioritize efficiency over community. Economic systems reward overwork. These aren't conspiracies. They're emergent properties of systems optimizing for goals other than biological health. The result is that supporting system health often requires active effort against default conditions. This isn't about perfection or rigid control. It's about intentional choices that move in a healthier direction. Small, consistent changes accumulate into significant effects because they shift system dynamics. The person who gradually improves sleep quality, adds more whole foods, incorporates regular movement, and maintains social connections isn't making dramatic interventions. But over time, these adjustments change their physiological baseline. This explains why lifestyle interventions, though often dismissed as soft or obvious, show powerful effects in research. They're not addressing single pathways. They're supporting fundamental regulatory systems. When those systems function well, the body becomes more resilient to challenges and better able to maintain homeostasis under stress. Consider inflammation again. You can't eliminate it, and you wouldn't want to. Inflammation is protective when appropriate. The goal is balanced regulation. That balance depends on multiple inputs. Diet affects baseline inflammatory tone through multiple mechanisms. Exercise creates beneficial inflammatory stress that improves regulatory capacity. Sleep modulates inflammatory responses. Stress management prevents chronic inflammatory activation. Social connection influences inflammation through neuroendocrine pathways. No single intervention fixes dysregulated inflammation, but multiple small interventions, each supporting regulation, create cumulative improvement. The person who reduces ultra-processed food intake, sleeps consistently, manages stress moderately well, and maintains relationships isn't doing anything dramatic, but they're supporting the systems that regulate inflammation, leading to measurably different outcomes over time. This framework also explains individual variation in health outcomes. Why do some people seem to tolerate poor habits without obvious consequences, while others struggle despite seemingly healthy behaviors? Part of the answer is genetic variation affecting how robustly systems function and how much stress they can handle. Some people have more resilient stress response systems, more efficient metabolic regulation, or stronger immune function. But genetics aren't destiny. They set the range of possible outcomes. Where you land within that range depends heavily on environmental inputs and behaviors. Someone with genetic vulnerability to metabolic dysfunction might maintain health with careful attention to diet, activity, and sleep. Someone with robust genetics might maintain health despite poor habits, at least for a while. Eventually, though, chronic system stress overwhelms even good genetics. The practical message is that you work with the biology you have. You can't choose your genetic starting point, but you can influence how that genetic potential expresses itself. Supporting system health doesn't guarantee perfect outcomes. It shifts probabilities in a favorable direction. Someone predisposed to autoimmune conditions can't prevent them entirely through lifestyle, but they can potentially delay onset, reduce severity, or improve management through choices that support immune regulation. This probabilistic thinking is important because it prevents both fatalism and magical thinking. You can't control everything, and perfect behavior doesn't guarantee perfect health. But your choices matter significantly. They influence system function, which influences disease risk and resilience. That's enough to make thoughtful decisions worthwhile, even without guarantees. The complexity of these interactions means simple rules and universal prescriptions often fail. Do this, get that result rarely works because outcomes depend on context. The diet that improves one person's metabolic markers might not help another because their metabolic dysregulation has different underlying causes. The exercise program that reduces one person's inflammation might increase another's because their regulatory systems respond differently. This doesn't mean everything is relative or nothing works. It means effective approaches require attention to individual context. Principles remain consistent. Support sleep. Manage stress. Eat mostly whole foods. Move regularly. Maintain connections. But implementation details vary. Someone with insulin resistance needs different nutritional strategies than someone with autoimmune inflammation. Someone with dysregulated cortisol needs different stress management than someone with burnout. The goal is supporting your particular system based on its current state and needs. This requires some self-awareness and often professional guidance. Blood tests reveal metabolic and inflammatory markers. Sleep tracking shows patterns. Symptom journals identify triggers. These tools provide feedback about whether interventions are moving things in the right direction. The time frame matters too. System-level changes take time. A week of better sleep won't reverse years of hormonal dysregulation. A month of improved diet won't completely rebalance the microbiome. But sustained effort over months and years creates measurable shifts. The body responds to consistent patterns, not isolated behaviors. This is why crash diets, exercise binges, and other short-term intensive interventions often fail. They don't provide the sustained signal needed for system adaptation. The body doesn't track individual molecules or count calories or measure receptor binding affinity. It tracks patterns, consistency across time, the story your behavior tells through repeated signals. When those signals support regulation, when they align with the biological expectations written into your design, systems stabilize, hormones find their rhythms, immune responses stay balanced, metabolism runs efficiently. None of this happens perfectly because biology isn't perfect. It's adaptive, flexible, constantly adjusting. What you've seen tonight isn't a list of things to optimize or problems to fix. It's a description of conversation. Chemical messages moving through blood, crossing membranes, finding receptors, triggering responses that ripple outward. These conversations happen whether you pay attention or not. They've been happening since before you learned language, and they'll continue until they stop. The question isn't whether to participate. You're already participating. The question is whether the participation is informed or accidental. Most of what determines hormonal health happens in the margins. The hour you choose for sleep, the composition of breakfast, the walk you take or skip, the stress you process or carry. These aren't dramatic interventions, which is exactly why they work. They're sustainable adjustments that shift baselines rather than forcing acute changes. The body responds to what you do most days, not what you do occasionally. Understanding doesn't require mastering every pathway or memorizing every hormone name. It requires recognizing that your physiology is integrated, that mental and physical health aren't separate domains, that today's choices create tomorrow's baseline. The endocrine system evolved to maintain life across changing conditions. It's sophisticated enough to handle complexity you'll never consciously manage. Your role isn't to control it. Your role is to provide conditions where it can function as designed. That means respecting rhythms the modern world often ignores, light and dark cycles, activity and rest, social connection and solitude, feast and fast. These patterns aren't arbitrary preferences. They're biological requirements, shaped by millions of years of selection pressure. When you align with them, even imperfectly, systems work better. When you fight them constantly, dysfunction accumulates until symptoms force attention. The hormones that coordinate your existence right now, this moment, are doing their work silently, adjusting glucose availability, modulating inflammation, preparing for sleep that hasn't arrived yet, maintaining bone density you won't notice for decades. They're not waiting for permission or instruction. They're responding to the environment you create through behavior, to the inputs you provide through choices made hours or days ago. This conversation never stops. It adapts to whatever you give it, finding equilibrium wherever it can. The question is what equilibrium you're building toward. Whether the patterns you're creating support the function you'll need years from now. Whether your choices acknowledge the biology underneath or ignore it until problems force recognition. The chemical messengers that make you human are still moving through your blood right now, carrying information between cells that will never meet, coordinating systems that span your entire body. They'll keep working while you sleep, while you wake, through every moment until they can't anymore. What they're able to accomplish depends partly on genetics you didn't choose, but significantly on the environment you create through what you do most days. That's not a burden. It's an opportunity. The system responds to input. You control more of that input than you might think.